Good evening. Let's call this board work session to order, and I'll ask the treasurer to call the roll.
Ms. Adair?
Here.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Here.
Ms. Gibbs? Mr. Ragland?
Here.
Ms. Reyes?
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I'd like to ask Mr. Oldham to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. Everyone, please be upstanding.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Oldham. All right, I'll briefly read through the agenda just so we know the work that we have before us this evening. We're going to hear from the administration as it relates to follow-up to the Facilities Task Force recommendations. We'll have a thorough conversation related to that information, those recommendations, and where we go from here. We do then have, in addition to that, we'll hear a summary then of that discussion from Dr. Stanford before we adjourn. Now, we all did agree that the work session would run to approximately 7:30, so if we do go after or later than 7:30, we'll have to agree to do so as a board. So, having said that, is there a motion that we adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Treasurer?
Ms. Adair?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Mr. Ragland?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And before I turn it over to the superintendent, I'll just say a few opening words. So I just want to, first of all, are there members of the Facilities Task Force with us here this evening? Just please stand and be recognized for your work. We appreciate your ongoing advocacy on behalf of those recommendations. And so, as you know, the board is committed to the process and making the best possible decisions for all of our 50,000 students, and not only the students that are in the district now, but students to come. And as you know, there are a multitude of considerations. The board issued a directive to the administration, and we're here to make sure the administration has the guidance that it needs to act upon that directive in our resolution. I do want to clear up one thing that we keep hearing quite a bit, and that is that the board rejected most of or a majority of the recommendations. And just to clarify, there were 8. The board adopted 4 immediately and directed the administration to provide additional information on 2 more. So we actually moved 6 of 8 forward. So just for clarification's sake. I also did, based in part on conversation last evening at the meeting, I want to share that there has been no recommendation related to removing elementaries from the Dominion feeder pattern, and I do not anticipate that there will be. So there's been no formal discussion of that, so I just want people to rest easy. I know that has been word on the street. This board has not contemplated that. There's no recommendation, and I do not believe that we anticipate contemplating removing elementaries from that particular feeder pattern. And I just wanted to share that. And having said that, let's then turn oh, Mr. Brown, I beg your pardon.
I thought you had seen it. I just wanted to take slight issue with your characterization of what the board did with the task force recommendations. If you want to count 6 of 8, that's one way to look at it. I disagree with that. I think that a substantial amount of the task force work was rejected.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members of the Board of Education, I want to start my remarks this evening with a loose interpretation of a quote from a friend of mine that is an international expert in organizational development. The friend once advised me when I was working on a major state project, let your people know that sometimes you have to go slow in order to go fast. I believe that his advice applies to why the administration asked the Board of Education to have this meeting with us tonight. the administration needed to slow down to have this discussion about the next steps after the board adopted its resolution on November the 7th, to better understand the directive given to us in that resolution, to review what are the intentions behind the words that are in that resolution. And so this evening, we will begin our discussion by at least me giving you my interpretation of what the purpose of this meeting is and what are the outcomes that the administration would like to achieve by the end of the meeting. The administration believes that the purpose of this meeting is for the Board of Education to provide the administration with additional guidance and direction to complete the directives in the following clause adopted by the Board of Education on November the 7th. So board members, please pull out the resolution that was adopted on November the 7th, that's in your packet, and go to the third to the last be it further resolved clause. So the third from the bottom, be it further resolved clause, and it reads as follows. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education directs that no action be taken on administrative site recommendation number 1, and in parens, recommendation number 6, and recommendation number 3, and identify interim alternative solutions for Columbus Alternative High School, but that the interim superintendent continue to study the various components of those recommendations and report to the board.
I'm not following. I want to make sure I'm looking at the right document because it's not what I saw.
Looking at the resolution regarding the final recommendations of the Facilities Task Force dated November 7th, it should be in your folder.
Yeah, I do have that.
The superintendent is looking at the be it further resolved clause, third up from the bottom of that motion.
It has an admin site recommendation number 1 in it?
Yes,
Okay. Got it?
I think so, but it didn't follow with what I heard.
Thought you heard? Okay.
It's different. There is no 6 in parens.
Oh,
Got you.
Right.
Okay, that's what threw you off?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
when
okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Yeah. So I'll just read it directly from the resolution. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education directs that no further action be taken on administrative site recommendation number 1, recommendation number 3, and identify interim alternative location solutions for Columbus Alternative High School, but that the interim superintendent continue to study the various components of those recommendations and report back to the board. Okay? My interpretation of that clause is twofold. First, the board would like the administration to identify interim alternative solutions for COS, or Columbus Alternative High School. Second, the board would like the administration to conduct a study on the components of administrative site recommendation number 1 and the components of recommendation number 3 and report the results of that study to the board. Now, board members, that is my interpretation of that clause. Is my interpretation consistent with your understanding of that clause?
Yes, Mr. President, for me, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Since we now have a common understanding of what that clause, of that interpretation of the clause, the outcomes that we would like to achieve as an administration are as follows. 1, identify a timeline for the study of administrative site recommendation number 1, recommendation number 3, and the identification of interim alternative solutions for COS. Now, mind you, the timeline does not have to be the same for all 3 items. We can have different timelines for each of those different items, but at least having a timeline for each of those directives in that clause. 2, identify the items in administrative site recommendation number 1, recommendation number 3, and the identification of interim alternative solutions for COS that the board would like the administration to address with a study. So again, identifying the items, and what I mean by items, do you just want us to look at the administrative site recommendation that deals with the Morris Road bus compound? Or do you want us to look just only at the Beery Marion Franklin Opportunity Center part of that recommendation? Because there are three different recommendations in that one recommendation. And so what we're asking for, do you want us to look at all three of them or one or two of them? Okay? And the same would be true for the school site recommendation as well. There are three different parts to that recommendation. I'll go into a little bit more detail about what those three parts are later on. But I just want to make sure you understand what I mean by items when, in that sentence. 3, identify the list of questions, and this is an important one, identify the list of questions that board members would like to have answered with a study of administrative site recommendation number 1, recommendation number 3, and identification of interim alternative solutions for CAS. Number 4, identify the process to report the results of the additional study to the Board of Education. Written report, board presentation, or both. Or if there's another way to present this information back to the board, please offer those ideas as well. And then last, would like to know if the board at this time have any other additional outcomes that you would like to see as a result of this process tonight.
So the superintendent has outlined outcomes that he hopes to achieve as part of this work session. And now his question to us is, are there other outcomes that we would like to achieve as part of the work session? Mr. Brown.
From my perspective, what I'm interested in seeing is a recommendation that we have, a recognition, rather, that we have several problems. Those that recommendation 3 attempts to address, those that the administrative site recommendation attempts to address, and all of the problems that we're aware of with respect to CAS and everything we've heard from the community. What I'd like to see is a listing of all of the options that are available, all of the options that are possible to address those problems, and an evaluation of each of those in terms of does it work or not? Does it make sense or not? Obviously, from my perspective, highest priority factor is, how does it benefit our kids and their education? But, and I'm not suggesting that those options that make no sense receive a whole lot of study. I mean, it's okay if you list it and say, clearly this doesn't work. Clearly we don't need to look further at this. But those that do have some merit would require some further study and then to report back to us about each of those options and with recommendations. That's essentially, from my perspective, what I think we need to do. And to do that on a pretty quick basis.
Colleagues, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the things I definitely would like to see come from this conversation is, one, some definitive idea that we are willing to go forward with a discussion about what is going to be alternative space for CAS. Are we determining at some point that we're going to build a new building? Is that a part of this conversation? I think it's something that we should have. With regard to Dominion and that move, again, I would like more information on the feasibility of it And for me, it is a strong fidelity to the idea, a strong commitment, dedication to the idea that we will strengthen and sustain that immersion language program as a part of that middle school with Dominion, so that those students have smooth transition to the Columbus North International School that would subsequently be at Brookhaven, the old Brookhaven. To me, that's a strong program. It's something that is a gem in our district as much as COS and several other our schools, Centennial, Eastmore, just to name a few. I'd also like the opportunity, if germane this evening, to ensure that we at least jumpstart a future conversation that will take us into what we're going to do about the rest of our high schools and answer that question. Again, not this evening, but at least jumpstart a conversation that we began several years ago with the Facilities Master Plan about what our plans are with the district in terms of our high school academics and our high school facilities. So I like this board and the community that we represent to have some sort of definitive idea that we're going to move forward with some sort of plan that is planning something for COS in terms of a building, and if so, what alternative space is going to be available. And again, that conversation with Columbus North International in terms of the Dominion, a Cole Kenwood Spanish immersion and Hubbard mastery movement into the current CNIS building and the high school population of students subsequently transitioning to that Brookhaven. How is that going to work academically? How is that going to work in terms of facilities being prepared for student transition? Because one of the things I definitely would like to put out is that as much as Dominion wants to move from their current space to Columbus North International, there are still some issues with that facility that deal with anything from HVAC to windows to vectors, another name, folks, for vermin, vectors. There's any number of things going on with that space, and I want to be sure that any of our children who move to that site and move to Brookhaven, that those facilities are optimal for teaching and learning.
Are there other outcomes that board members hope to achieve out of the work session? Board Member Reyes?
I don't necessarily know if it's an outcome additional to what's been said, but in some of the data that I've looked at, I'm really interested in making sure that we're forecasting population growth at least 5 years ahead. From the data that I've looked from projected growth for some of the immersion programs in the current population at Dominion, if their projections are true that they continue to grow, we're moving a large population to a building. How are we going to sustain not only the projected growth in that population currently at Dominion, but then adding to a population that's projected to grow? I've got some Kenwood projections here all the way to 2025 and some similar ones for Spanish immersion. I just want to make sure that we're looking at 5, 6, 7 years down the road, are we creating another issue? In addition to the things that Board Member Cole said, I think there's also a social aspect when you're putting these students together and they're going to have 2, 3 years together, and then now they're going to go to separate high schools intentionally. There is a transition, an emotional transition, a social transition that occurs when they build these relationships with each other. So now I'm a student, and we're a student body, which we promote for unity and promotion of student and being proud to be whatever, a Mustang, all those other things that we are. And then now they're going to be, then later after they complete their schooling, now it's bye-bye to my best friend for the last 3 years because I have to go here. So I think there's a need to evaluate what are the repercussions for that. In speaking to some of the parents in the immersion programs, there was concern that we ensure that we look at true fluent teachers, having the correct resources, not just ESL teachers, that teachers with the understanding of emerging curriculum, not just foreign language. And there was also concern about making sure that we didn't only have French 1, that we had French 2.5, French 3. So some of the things that would have to occur as you make your recommendation. What are the academic adjustments? What are those things? And at the end of the day, I also want to know what are the costs. I think there's a question in here about what would it cost us to repair North International so that it's a viable building as we move students there.
And if I may, Mr. President, Ms. Reyes, a lot of what I've heard so far is a part of that discussion later on when we get to the different the recommendations that are in that clause. This part of the meeting was really to talk about what are the outcomes that we are looking for as a result of this meeting. And so a lot of the questions you're asking now can be raised when we get to the portion of the meeting when we talk about the specific recommendation of Dominion, North International, and so on. So I just want to keep us focused and keep us on track.
So then I believe that the way I interpret Mr. Brown's recommendation of ensuring that I want to know what other options exist. I would, that's because I believe some of our immersion families felt that the only option they were given was you move to Dominion. There's no other option, and so I want to know. So
yeah, I mean,
I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, if we don't have any other outcomes for the meeting, let's go ahead and move forward so we can get to the part where it seems most people want to have the conversation.
Are there any other specific outcomes that board members were hoping to achieve this evening? Board Member Adair?
Yes, I would like to ensure that we all walk out of this room with the idea that we know what we're doing, and that includes the audience, the families, the schools, and the community, and everyone's role and expectation moving forward. Everyone has a role in this and a voice, and everyone needs to understand what they are to do going forward. And so I want to make sure that we assign people things to think about, to engage in, and make sure we have a plan coming out of here where we can do that.
Thank you.
Any other outcomes, Mr. Brown?
I just wanted to clarify slightly, and I appreciate both what Mr. Cole and Ms. Reyes had to say, and I don't disagree. The clarification, and I think what Mr. Cole had to say basically fleshes out in many ways my comment. And I just want to make sure as we look at all of the options that included among those, because I think it has significant value, are the recommendations made by the task force, and that we not take those off the table for any reason. Those were studied very thoroughly by many of our residents in our community, and they ought to be accorded that kind of. So it's not that we're not weighting any of them, but I do want to make sure that those are among the options considered.
Okay, any other specific outcomes that people have in their minds? If not, Dr. Stanford?
Thank you. And so that concludes kind of the introduction to tonight's discussion in order to, again, set the foundation for the discussion about each of the recommendations in that clause, to make sure that there's a common understanding about the purpose of this meeting and what outcomes we are trying to achieve by the end of the meeting. And so to start this discussion off, I'd like to take the board's attention to Board Policy 7105, that's in your materials. As the board knows, Board Policy 7105 is the policy that the district has used for a number of years, going back to, I believe, the 1970s, that we have used in this school district to close school buildings. As some may not know, that this school district once enrolled over 100,000 students as late as the mid to late 1970s. And during the next 10 or 15 years after that high point in enrollment, the school district's enrollment dropped to about 65,000 students. And so during that 15, 20-year period, this policy guided the district through the consolidation and the closure of many buildings across the district. And the genesis of that process is because whenever the district goes through underutilization of their buildings, then this policy directs the administration to bring that to the board's attention, and then the board has the opportunity to determine whether or not a committee should be pulled together to study underutilization across the school district. And so as the board members see in Policy 7105, there are a number of different factors outlined in that policy that the committee should look at in order to determine the recommendations that are made to the board. And as you see, that last criterion, other variables, which in essence gives the Board of Education to identify any additional other factors that they would like to see considered as a part of the process that may not be listed in that list of criteria. Just wanted to, bring that to the board's attention because there seemed to be a lot of confusion during the facilities task force process about why we weren't looking at building new buildings, why we weren't looking at acquiring additional space, because the policy doesn't give us that authority or that flexibility. What the policy gives us the authority to do is to look at each of our buildings to determine whether or not there is underutilization, one, and if there is underutilization, then look at each of these different factors to make recommendations on whether a building should be consolidated or closed. Now, there were some additional factors that were given to the task force through the resolution that was adopted by the Board of Education in February, which authorized me to start the whole process, identifying a task force and going forward. And so if there are any questions about Board Policy 7105, and just know that Board Policy 7100, which is also in your materials, is the policy that we have used in the past to guide the facilities master plan process. So when you talk about the identification of property to acquire or the identification of new buildings to be built or buildings to be renovated, or what should be the future direction of our district when it comes to our portfolio of buildings in our district, 7100 is the policy that guides that type of work. And that's the policy that was used a couple of years ago when the board directed the administration to form the ad hoc facilities master plan task force that was co-chaired by Ms. Gibbs and Mr. Peretti. And we went through a similar process of going through the data and evaluating the data and evaluating all of our buildings. Now, that process of evaluating the buildings and evaluating data is very similar, but the purpose and the outcomes that each of those policies are directed to achieve are completely different. And just wanted to make sure that the listening audience and those who are here tonight is very clear on the distinction between those two policies. So utilizing Board Policy 7105, the board adopted a resolution in February of 2018. And if you look into your materials, it looks like this, with resolution charging the superintendent, CEO, to form a facilities task force. And if you go to the last page, the last "now therefore it be it resolved" clause, you will see the charge given to the task force by the Board of Education. And that charge given to the task force and the administration was that the administration is to create a facilities task force comprised of internal and external participants to identify and present to the board recommendations for 1, school consolidations, 2, possible impacted student enrollment attendance zones, and 3, administrative consolidations and relocations by the end of August 2018. From this charge, the administration identified the task force role to be as follows: review data and make recommendations on schools and administrative buildings for closing, review data and make recommendations on changing the attendance boundaries and/or grade configurations, provide recommendations that have a statement of rationale, provide recommendations based on overall balance and objectivity of factors listed in Board Policy 7105, issue a draft report to the board in August of 2018, issue a final report to the board in November of 2018. With that charge and those directives or guidance from the administration in terms of their role, the task force began its work on April the 12th and concluded its work on October the 22nd. During that several months of deliberation, debate, discussion, and review of the data, the task force issued a set of recommendations that were presented as a final recommendation to the Board of Education prior to the November 7th meeting. On November the 7th, the board adopted a resolution that gave the following directives, and that's the resolution we referenced earlier, and that Mr. Baker kind of summarized. Again, 4 recommendations were approved for implementation by the Board of Education. 2 additional recommendations required further study, which are the topics of tonight's meeting, and then 2 recommendations were not adopted for implementation by the Board of Education. Now we can get into, well, let me stop and ask, are there any questions, clarifying questions, or things that I need to review based on what I've gone through so far? Okay. All right, let's get into the recommendations themselves that are in that clause that we have, that has brought us together tonight. So, administrative site recommendation number 1. The task force made the following recommendation to the Board of Education: close the Morris Road bus compound, close the Beery Marion Franklin Opportunity Center, and close the Adult Education Center at Lexington Avenue. The recommendations, that recommendation was based on the following rationale for each of the sites listed. For the Morris Road bus compound, the Morris Road bus compound is the smallest district transportation site that we have, and that the task force, along with the administration, thought that the operations that are at that site could be consolidated to achieve efficiencies and effectiveness with the existing sites that we would have at the Freebus compound and at the Fort Hays compound. The task force also and the administration also discussed the value of the property that is at the Morris Road bus compound. For the Beery Middle School Opportunity Center site, the site right now is severely underutilized. And so there was a lot of discussion about the costs associated with operating that site, and the underutilization of that site from the district's perspective. Because right now we have, I believe there are 2 tenants that are in the building. We have the Opportunity Center program there, and then we have the library that has a branch in the building as well. But even with those 2 two tenants, if you will, the building is severely underutilized, and having to, provide that upkeep for the building. And then with the Adult Education Center at Lexington, because of the tremendous work of Pegeen Cleary-Potts and her team with adult education, we have been trying to identify an alternative location for the adult education program that is at that building. The building is an old building. The program has definitely outgrown the building over the years, and so with this process, the idea was that the program could be located in other places around the district, and there would be the opportunity to close the building. The building also has tremendous parking problems with it as well, because it is a small elementary school site that doesn't have a lot of parking attached to it as well. And so that was the rationale for why we thought it was time to move on from that building to another building that could be designed to better suit the needs of the programs that are in that building.
Opportunity for a kind of exchange and conversation. Can we have is this open for back and forth discourse here?
Mr. President, to Mr. Cole, yes. I would ask, though, that the board allows me to go through each of the we're going to go through each recommendation in terms of site number 1 first, then we'll go through number 3, and with reviewing what's in those, I'm going to give you the rationale that we utilize in making those recommendations. And then after giving that rationale, then we can get into the back and forth and the dialogue and conversation. So yes, we're ready for that on this first recommendation now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, are there thoughts, questions, comments on the administrative site recommendation, Mr.
Yes,
Vice
yes,
President?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. Oh, so the first one is, an outcome of this conversation I'd like to have is getting some sort of idea data-wise, particularly with the idea of closing the Morse Road site. Where do we gain efficiencies in transportation by doing that? And I don't mean just in terms of cost. Given the size of the district, to me, that seems to be still a very viable space to maintain transport to, pick up our students on the far east and north side of town. So I like to know how does this impact transportation from an efficiency standpoint in terms of time that students will be picked up and arrive to school. Bell time, how does this impact bell time? With the Beery Opportunity Center, I remember specific.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
On the Morris Road compound, I'm interpreting what you have just said is that you're looking for a cost-benefit analysis that weighs not only the costs that we've talked about already, but what are the impacts and what are the benefits or the costs associated with those impacts of moving that or closing that center.
All right, so there's a cost benefit. There's a cost benefits piece to this, and then there's a student impact piece to this. So there are two. The student impact of this is, how does this impact bell time with our children? Are they going to get to school on time? Is this going to be another situation where our children are standing out, waiting for transportation that may arrive, may not arrive, may arrive late? How does this change bus scheduling? I'd like to know that by closing this facility.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments specifically to the Morse Road bus compound? Ms. Gibbs?
Are we going building by building or
Yeah, we're
recommendation?
We're going to go recommendation by recommendation, but within each of those two recommendations, there are multiple buildings. And so I would like to address each building before we go on to a new building.
So we're going to go building by building. Okay, great. Thank you. I concur with Board Member Cole. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for this forum, and I think we can get a lot done here. My question is also around student impact, because we can sell the building and make money. We saw that analysis. But when we talk about events such as this weekend, when we're in inclement weather, and we know there's delay time in travel, what is the travel time for our far north and our extreme north students? I want to know, could you bring us back the information on which students are served out of the Morse Road bus compound, which schools, and in a district of choice, how much time would it increase the amount of time our students are spending on the bus? So not just the wait time, will it impact how much more time students are spending on the bus, and how will it impact the routing? So if I'm going, if a bus from Morse Road is picking me up on 161 and it serves the north side, that's one thing. But am I going to have to stay on longer because the bus has to go back to Freebus in that type of traffic? And you're going to cross several traffic patterns then going back to one station. So I would be concerned about putting all of our eggs in one basket and how that moves. The second part is, if has someone expressed interest in buying Morse Road? And is there someone who has plans for that? I would want to know if that's a part of the considerations that the committee reviewed. And in terms of the number of buses, we say it's our smallest bus compound. How many buses are on Morse Road? What is our definition of small? So I would want to know how many buses are housed in each of our locations. I believe you shared that with us before, but if you could tell us how many buses are there, how will that impact our employees? Are we reducing the number of drivers then that we have? Or will that impact our driver? How will that impact the employee transportation and getting there on time, as opposed to having multiple locations where you can work if everyone has to get where they live to the south end to get their buses? And I mean, I want to know how it impacts students, families, drive time, wait time for buses, how much time you're on there, and then how it impacts our employees.
Thank you.
All right, other questions specifically? Yes, Mr. Brown, on the bus compound?
And briefly, I passed along a suggestion a few days ago with respect to having to close school because of the problems with getting buses running. And I want to preface this by saying the idea may have no merit whatsoever. And that's still true, but I want to mention it in this context. And that is, I'm aware that in Columbus City Schools, at least during the years that I've served, Monday, or rather Tuesday, was the first time the schools had closed because the buses couldn't run. And that's why it may have no merit. But up in the Cleveland area, where I'm from and where I served 15 years, eventually, because it happened fairly often, we built a bus garage, heated bus garage. Now, I don't know whether that's something that is even close to worth looking at here, but if it is, then that may be a factor in what we do with these sites. And just want to add that in as another factor if it has any merit. And please don't hesitate to reject it. It worked out well in the snow belt, but it may be more cost than it's worth here.
Thank you. Any other comments on the bus compound?
Just one more, and thank you for that. Just another thought. In the data that you bring back, and this is, and again, I love transportation. I've dealt with them for many years, and I know they work very hard. But I would want to see the customer service reports from our parents and their feedback, and also from our partners. until state law changes, we have to transport private, Catholic, and charter. And as being responsible for that, I would want to know how would that impact all of those operations as well. Because we're not just centering to serve us, we have to center to serve everyone. And so what percentage of our customer service or our calls to 888 are around transportation, and what are those concerns? And if we can have those provided in a report around what our community or what our parents and families have said, I think we need to take that piece of data into consideration as well.
Board Member Adair?
Yes, so Board Member Gibbs asked part of my question about the impact to our partners, as well as any impact to maybe after-school programs or field trip programs that students may use. And then I also had a question, if we do close it, what would be any cost impact to moving those buses to the other two lots? Would we need any infrastructure changes, any additional parking, paving? I don't know. I don't know what we would need, but what would be the cost associated around the movement of the buses there?
So make sure I'm following that last part, and I think I'm right there with you.
Sorry, I wasn't very articulate there.
Will the additional buses and people
Yes.
at those two sites require infrastructure additions?
Correct. Or improvement to current infrastructure.
Okay.
Anything else on the bus compound? If not, Beery Middle School. Ms. Vice President?
Thank you, Mr. President. I recall when, under the tenure of Dr. Good, when we turned that site into an opportunity center, and I mean, I was quite proud of that accomplishment, particularly providing that type of resource that provided adult education, that provided some community enrichment opportunity in a part of town that is somewhat very limited of that, with the exception of Marion Franklin. I mean, that's a limited opportunity for those families in that community. Is there opportunity for us to think about, enhancing that facility, increasing adult education opportunity there, introducing the concept of pre-K to that environment at that site? Is there opportunity for additional adult learning and training that's vocationally oriented? What costs could possibly be associated with that? Where is there enrichment opportunity for youngsters that could carry on during non-school hours? During non-school hours. That includes summer and breaks that partners could utilize as space. That was my apprehension for and my want to gain more study and information on this site particularly. It really was. Is there going to be a missed opportunity in closing that site and subsequently selling that building versus figuring out how we can be more innovative in our relationship to the community and impart them something that they could use more sustainably and more long-term?
Thank you.
Board Member Reyes?
So Dr. Stafford, I guess where I'm hearing some of the feedback comes from our own board policies, 7,000. I think we're talking about J, circumstances, unique situations within a school or district that, what would an impact of a move, of a close, how does that impact our neighborhood or community? And that's one of the things that I kept asking myself as we looked at some of these recommendations. And actually that was pointed out that that's exactly the one thing that I have questions. As we move forward, what is the impact if we close? Because I thought the reason we created that was because we were serving a gap and a need in that community, in that neighborhood. So I think if we use that lens with those questions that Board Member Cole just stated, I think that's important for, especially this one in the adult care, because I, as a person that works in a nonprofit organization that refers people to that, to some of these centers and looks to partner with these centers, I can see there could be an impact on my community, and I'm not even, my organization is not even on that side of town, but I refer people and they're willing to go to those facilities because they exist. Absolutely. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should have them. I'm just, I think the Reeb Center has showed us what a facility like that could possibly look like by bringing in good partners. Is it us that has to do that? I don't know.
Questions on Beery? Mr. Brown.
And I appreciate Ms. Reyes teeing that up, because one of the comments I have is that we really have to keep in mind that we've got limited resources, like nonprofits and like lots of others these days. And with our limited resources, our first priority has to be to our core mission. Our core mission is what's required by law. That's educating our young people, grades K through 12, and in all the best ways we possibly can. The other things that we do are good things. They're good for the community. They have value to people in the community. But because they're not part of our core mission, we have to evaluate those differently. And I think with a much closer grasp of being good financial stewards of those resources, those scarce resources that our taxpayers provide.
Yes, thank you so much. So when it comes to Beery, I wasn't supportive of it. For the same reason I knew that closing Clinton Middle School was going to eventually choke out the attendance to Brookhaven. When we said we were going to close Beery, we said it was definitely going to impact the attendance to Marion Franklin. And here we are, 4 to 5 years later, and who has low enrollment? We've closed Brookhaven, and we've choked out the attendance to Marion Franklin. The center was amazing, but this administration came to us and gave us 15 million reasons why we should have the center and all of the great opportunities that was going to come from it. And these are all the partners that were going to be in it. It was going to be sustainable, and it was going to be a long-lasting impact. It was not going to be a flash in the pan. It wasn't going to be this short-term trend. This is something we were going to invest in the community over the long term. Less than 4 to 5 years, here we are abandoning something that we have sacrificed an entire feeder pattern on, put a high school in jeopardy for, totally rearranged the South Side Middle School attendance pattern for this initiative, and now we are walking away from it. And so my question is, first, I would like to see that whole original vision that came forth, because we have 2 people left in the building now, but we had about 8 or 9 partners. What happened? Did we manufacture this evacuation from this building, or was it an authentic, genuine partner departure from this vision? I want to know what happened to the entire partnership and why the building is now empty when we heralded and we promised the community that we were going to put this resource there and that it would be there. While we had scarce resources, we intentionally made the choice to make this investment in this building, as opposed to then closing Buckeye and keeping Beery open, where you could walk from the back door of Beery to Marion Franklin. We chose to keep Buckeye open and close the closest middle school to the high school. And even then, back then, we said this is what, we asked if this was going to happen. No, we're here, we're going to be there. And that it wasn't going to impact, or we had a way to keep our students going to Marion Franklin. And so I would want to see, if we're going to do anything with this facility, what are 3 or 4 more options, and in those options, what can build a stronger relationship to the feeder high school of Marion Franklin? Can it go back to being the middle school, since in the facilities master plan, every family on every side of town wants to go back to K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12, other than our specialty schools. So could Beery hold those extra 6th graders that will pull from those existing K-6s, which we know, other than our specialty programs, most of our families want to pull away from? And so when you bring that data back, I think that will also be good. We know that any building that is not open is going to have some capital resource needs, but there's a library there. So I would want to know from the library, what is the foot traffic report? How many people are using the library in that community and those other resources? Can we get a utilization report at the height of the partnership agreement, and how many people were using those resources and how many people are using them now? Because while there's it's easy for us to say it's ours, we're taking it back. But we made a commitment and investment to that community, and walking away from it we need to be as intentional and supportive of the community as we were when we came in and launched this design. And if it's going to go back to a building, why not a middle school, back to our core mission, Board Member Brown, that then supports and then feeds into Marion Franklin again and restores that feeder pattern that we disrupted because we wanted this initiative. That data would be very helpful for me.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. Any other questions, Board Member Reyes on Beery?
So talking about initiatives, I think at that time we had a board meeting, or maybe one of our sessions where we talked about what is our mission, our dedication, our priority for adult education. So kind of going back to this past decisions, right? At that discussion, it was brought forth by the administration and agreed to by the board that we would have some adult education. And we went back and forth, and I was probably one of the ones that said, is that something that Columbus City Schools is responsible for? At that time, which was not that long ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, the decision was move forward. So I think as we explore, move to make our decisions, we also, that needs to be discussed at some point, is if we're closing, and if we decide at some point that we're not going to open somewhere else as a Columbus City School partner or a Columbus City School initiative, we need to make that either an objective or a statement of what will we serve pre-K to 12th grade education, and somebody else takes adult education, because that was the mission, I believe, and I'll have to go back to our 3 goals that we live by, but I do believe that's probably in that long goal document that we had adult education, which was a result of why we ended up doing this. So I think that bears further discussion, and maybe that's something that you all talk about. Are we responsible? Are we going to continue to address adult education within Columbus City Schools?
Anyone else who'd like to speak on Beery who hasn't already spoken on Beery? No, Ms. Gibbs?
As another data point, can you please bring back to us what was the capacity of Beery before we closed it? And when we made that decision, what was the attendance at Beery and at Buckeye before we closed it? How many students were attending, and what was the capacity of those buildings, just as a data point? And I do believe we should have that conversation around adult education. I'm supportive of it, but we could have like corn pops in that building. Whatever it was, we sold it to the community that we were there and we were going to be there. and that it was going to be viable. So if it is no longer viable, I would want to see, and I feel like we owe the board and the community a report of the lack of viability of it now, or what happened to it, what has happened to it over time. I don't think we can just, be like the Baltimore Colts and leave in the middle of the night and show up in Indianapolis and say, hey, we're new. We have to let the people know. This isn't one we just stroke with a pen and not report out. We need to understand the progression from the establishment to where we are now. What part of it were we responsible for? Did the community support it? That information would be very beneficial in considering this option. And would it be your benefit analysis of how well it would support the Marion Franklin feeder pattern by returning to a school?
Superintendent?
Mr. President, members of the board, I just want to just interject for a brief moment here, because our role tonight as the administration is to listen and to make sure that we fully understand where you want us to go with this. But there was one, I think, misstatement, and when you talked about Beery and when it closed and when the library idea was brought to the table. My recollection is that Beery was closed in 2010, and the library idea didn't come to fruition until 2013. And so there was no connection of closing down the school in order to create the Marion Franklin Opportunity Center. Those were two separate actions with two separate people involved with two separate purposes for those actions being undertaken. Yeah, that would be a part.
All of it.
So again, I just wanted to clarify that,
Okay.
For this meeting, we're going to listen and we're going to take down all your questions and we're going to respond to those questions in written form after the meeting. That way we don't get into a back and forth and all of that. But because I heard that one thing that is, I didn't want a misconception to go further, in this conversation and in the community that, I think is a big one, because those two things did not have anything to do with each other. Beery was closed as a part of the school closing process in 2010. And the idea of opening it up as an adult education center with the library as a partner and all of that came about 3 years later under a different superintendent.
Okay.
If there are no other questions on Beery, let's move on to the Adult Education Center on Lexington. Colleagues? Ms. Gibbs.
Need a new building. The building on Lexington is awful.
I'm sorry, I missed that, I was writing.
Y'all need a new building.
For which one?
Lexington.
Lexington, I got it.
No, it's, we've done amazing work patching it, but the facility is no longer, I think, viable.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Reyes.
So, Dr. Stanford, the way it's written, is the idea that, or the recommendation that it would close, or is the idea that we would close it and we would move it? Again, supporting our back then strategy and goal and mission of providing adult education.
So, Mr. President, to Ms. Reyes, I consider this to be a point of clarification and not responding to the question. So the recommendation that was presented to the board on November the 7th was to move the programming in the building to another site in the district and close the building and no longer use that building for any educational or administrative purposes. Does that answer?
Yes, but it goes back to, as we're thinking about this viability versus the other viability, they're two adult education programs.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going back to, is one better? Why is one moved and the other one, is the other one moving? Is that, are we helping them move? Are we not helping them move? Just that whole conversation.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Superintendent.
President, so if I can state what you just said, in essence, looking at Lexington and demonstrating why it's different from the Beery decision or recommendation, from the Beery recommendation.
Based on our strategy moving forward. So we're either supporting adult education or we're not. And if we're supporting adult education, where is it going to be supported? Because you just mentioned that we've outgrown it, so obviously it's something that is needed, but that goes back to, is it us? Is it not us? And if it's, I mean, you would think people that are in education would take it on. So it's obviously important, and it's something that is needed. So maybe they move to Reed. Or maybe they move to.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the administrative site recommendation? Board Member Adair?
I'm sorry, can we go back to the bus question? I do have another question about if we move the bus, will there be an increased cost to gas and maintenance of the buses that have been moved? Thank you.
Any other thoughts on the administrative site recommendation? Okay. One more, Ms. Gibbs?
So as a point of clarification on the Lexington building, if we move the programs and we close the building, what happens to the building? Does that go and fold into the order of the facilities master plan? If we close Linmore and we close, because I don't know if, right offhand, if Beery was in the facilities master plan or if the administrative sites were in the facilities master plan. I don't think we got to them in detail. But if we close the building, what happens to them?
Mr. President, to Ms. Gibbs, again, I would consider this to be a question of clarification. With any building that is closed, we have to go through our process of determining whether or not there is a district use for that building. And if we decide that there is, when I say we as an administration, if we decide there is no district use for that building, then we would have to come to the board and inform you of that, and then the board would have to make a decision of, you know, do you identify this building for sale or disposal under the property disposal law, which would get us into, has to be offered to a charter school first, so on and so forth.
I get that part.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, has there been any vision around any programs or anything looking into the future? I guess that's a question for just another time, but I understand our process and I understand how we do that. Yeah. But just didn't know if there was something bigger, a bigger idea or any ideas or people who have approached us with ideas around what to do with them.
So, Mr. President, to Ms. Gibbs, if I'm following your question, with Lexington and with Beery in particular, there are a lot of repairs that have to be made to those buildings. And so during the facilities task force process, there was no consideration of future use for that. But I think the part of your question or the part of your comment about future uses, I think would be a part of policy 7100 and would be a part of that facilities master plan process of considering all of the buildings in our portfolio and deciding what that future use of buildings and how we're going to, you know, efficiently and effectively use the buildings in our district would be the place for that conversation. But in the short term, the administration and the facilities task force did not see a future use for Beery or Lexington.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Just very briefly, more big picture for the evening. We're now an hour and 15 minutes in. We haven't gotten near recommendation 3 issues, cause issues that I suspect most of our audience is anxious to hear. So I don't see how we're going to meet a 7:30 closing, and I just want to make sure we stay on task and keep moving forward to cover everything.
you for that reminder. Mr. Brown, don't lose hope. I do believe we're about to move on to the next recommendation.
I'm ready, yes.
Yes. I'm sorry. Apparently, we're not ready to move on. Ms. Gibbs, you have a question related to administrative site
Well, I just want to make a
recommendation number
comment
one?
that, I know I wasn't here for 7:30, but that each one of these recommendations deserve their due diligence. And we waited months to have this conversation. So I'm not sure how we came up with the 7:30, but there are a lot of people who are anxiously awaiting each and every one of these because our administration has been waiting to get direction on all of it. And so I don't want to artificially cut down any of that time frame because we need to give the direction to our team so they can work on all of it. And each and every one of them deserves review on its merit so we can move the process along.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that, Ms.
Okay.
Gibbs. If we do go past our original plan end time of 7:30, we'll just simply need to have consensus of the board to continue past 7:30.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to our next recommendation. Superintendent?
Thank you, Mr. President. So recommendation number 3, that concludes administrative site recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 3, again, had 3 different components to it. The first component would be to co-locate the North International program with the global program at the Brookhaven site and to work with the faculty and staff and parents and students to create a language immersion program for a high school language immersion program at that site, at the Brookhaven site. The second part of this recommendation was to move Dominion Middle School into the north site on Arcadia Avenue. And then the third component is to was proposed is to co-locate a middle school language immersion program at the north high school site as well on Arcadia. For the North High School rationale moving to global, that was a recommendation from the ad hoc committee that had never been implemented. And so that was kind of the starting point of the conversation about North International. And the administration and task force agreed with some of that feedback from the ad hoc committee that relocation of that program with the students at Global could create some really unique and exciting collaborations and exciting integration of those programs together, even though they would be separate programs. It would provide the students the opportunity to have peer-to-peer learning opportunities with each other, because in the North International program, we have students that are trying to learn a second language and English as their native language. And in the global program, we have students that are trying to learn English. And so if there was the opportunity to create clubs through the athletic opportunities, extracurricular opportunities, those students, and we could be intentional by creating, special clubs where those students can interact with each other and have that sort of peer-to-peer learning of the various languages that are a part of the program. The second part of this recommendation of moving Dominion to North was the idea of, again, that Dominion, we heard a lot of conversation, a lot of debate about the overcrowding at Dominion Middle School and the fact that students over the last several years have had to, even though they live in that feeder pattern, have been reassigned to other middle schools because there was not space available for them at Dominion Middle School. There was also a lot of conversation about being that this is a high school that with Dominion having adopted a STEAM focus over the last several years, that the amenities in that facility in North High School, would help them further their focus and concentration on STEAM activities and STEAM curriculum programming. But again, the main driver of the Dominion idea or recommendation was the overcrowding and wanting to have an immediate solution to that overcrowding, because in the facilities master plan, in the facilities ad hoc facilities master plan process a few years back, the solution was to build a new building that would accommodate the projected enrollment that that neighborhood would or that community would experience in the upcoming years. And then the last component of this recommendation, because and really the driving force in the discussions among the administration and task force was that this community, this school district, has struggled with offering a K-12 immersion experience especially for our two longest standing schools, which is Columbus Spanish Immersion and Ecole Kenwood. And so a lot of discussion about wanting to create that middle school experience that is a language immersion experience, because when we went to our current model, there was discussion years ago with renovating one of our buildings as a part of the facilities master plan into a middle school language immersion program, a 6-8 language immersion program. That project fell through. It did not go forward. And what was created in the alternative is what we have now, which is a K-6 at Spanish Immersion, Ecole Kenwood, Hubbard, that fed into a 7-12 at North High School. And what we have learned through this experience over the years is that there's a disconnect with parents wanting and students wanting to make that transition from 6th grade to 7th grade at North International. And just quite frankly, what we have been told over the years is that parents would rather have a full middle school experience than to have an immersion experience that split those middle school years into two different schools. And then I think also we have to own up as a district that at North International we did not create the full language immersion program at North International that would attract those families to that programming. And so there are a lot of different issues with the model that we finally did adopt in terms of the academic programming and why parents have not chosen to select North International. Now, again, some have chosen. I don't want to make it sound like there aren't families and students going from those two programs or those three programs into North International. There are parents who are selecting that as an opportunity. But we did see a number of parents who did not select that opportunity as well. And when we asked them about it, those are some of the things they said to us as to why they did not select that choice.
All right, so let's hear from board members on the first part of the recommendation, which is the relocation of Columbus North International to former Brookhaven. Questions, comments, feedback? What is it that you would like to hear back from the administration specifically on this part of recommendation number 3? Ms. Gibbs?
Well, I think it's an amazing, idea about pulling together international and global. Have we heard from the international parents what they thought? Because we've heard about every other group has voiced their opinion except the people that were moving. It's like, hey, we're fighting over your building, but we got to remember we're asking a community to leave it. And so just provide us the data from the international parents on those conversations. Secondly, if we're moving a student body from North to Brookhaven, our goal, and it used to be our policy, that if we move you to a building, you were going to a better building. You were going to better facilities. When we close schools, we try to move you to schools with air or schools with better amenities. What is the trade-off for International in the Brookhaven building? What upgrades and what facility accommodations do they need at Brookhaven so that they're not going to a building with a reduced number of opportunities and a reduced number of facilities? And what is that cost going to be to bring Brookhaven back up to a full high school status? I know we have students there now, but is the track ready? Are the locker rooms ready? I mean, they have sports teams. So our athletic facilities, what are those resources they're going to need to accommodate and to be able to be a part of that building? And then will we keep all the agreements with the North High School field? Because I know that's a hot button with Watterson as well, and that's a long-term agreement. And so can you bring us back, just making sure International stays whole in their move and making sure those facilities are up to snuff, and what would those costs be there? And what are the costs going to be for the other side?
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, one of the things that Ms. Gibbs touched on was a policy about moving students always to a better facility, and I understand pardon me?
Not a policy, practice.
A practice.
It's not practice.
Yeah, I was looking in policy and wondering what the basis for that is. I understand it has some merit and value, but I guess I don't know where it falls in terms, pardon me?
Where it came from?
Where it came from, and that it has any basis in the work that we do. It may in your decision-making, but I don't think it, when you say it's a practice, I guess I don't know what that means.
What it means is in the advent, in my 13 years on this board, as we started the facilities master plan, launched it in 2002, we didn't just embark on, let's build all these new buildings. We knew that we were going to have to go through, which we hadn't done in years, which is close buildings. And we knew we had to close a number of facilities. But as a part of our work with the communities, they always ask, where are my children going to go? And we've always been able to say, if we take away this, we'll give you that. And our former superintendents were always very cognizant of, if we're going to merge or we're going to close this building, which was no heat, no air. They're really dilapidated buildings. We didn't start this because we had 800 new buildings. We started this because we had really deteriorating infrastructure. We always made a very conscious decision that those students that were displaced were going to be put into better facilities. And that if we closed Fair Avenue, you were going to go to a new, or Main Street, you were going to go to a new building that was newly built with air, 21st century learning environment. And to the best of our ability, we've always been able to accomplish that in our school closings. We didn't do like St. Louis or some other schools that closed 30 and 40 school buildings at one time. But over the years, closing 2 or 3 at one time, we were able to consciously, purposely, and in a planning fashion, make sure we directed students to brand new buildings that once we closed their school or we moved their boundary changes, that they did not lose anything in a facility, but rather gained a better environment. So in practice, in planning, and in consultation and partnership with our families and communities, we've been able to achieve that. So practice would be able to do that. But I wouldn't want to, it was more of a, how can we do this the best, and maybe not always accomplish it, but because our bond program was so long, we were able to, be thoughtful about where we move kids.
All right, and I appreciate that, and I certainly it's desirable, and where it can be done, sure. If everybody in the district could move into new facilities, that would be wonderful. But we also have to keep in mind, again, what can our community provide in terms of resources.
That's why we have the facilities master plan. So over the next 10 to 15 years, our goal is that all of our buildings will be 21st century facilities and that every one of our students will have a choice of a portfolio of brand new buildings. It doesn't happen overnight. That's why we have a plan over the long term to achieve that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments related to the relocation of Columbus North International Board Member Adair?
I think one of the things that the community had asked for, and I'm interested in, is if we fully go with this plan, understanding that timelines are always movable and flexible, what do you see as the timeline for moving these, and in what order would they move? In what potential academic years? Understanding that that is just a tentative timeline, not even tentative, just out there. Just so people could have an idea. And then second, what would happen then to Dominion, and what would the plans be to that existing building back in that neighborhood?
And I'm sorry, Mr. President, to Ms. Adair, what was the last part that you said? What would happen with Dominion, and then you said something else?
Just within that neighborhood.
Within
what are
the
the plans for Dominion?
Okay. The first question you asked, I would consider that to be a point of clarification, Mr. President, to Ms. Adair. As a part of the recommendation, the task force identified, because of the different curriculum and academic components of the recommendation, that it was best for the administration to work with the staff and the community to fully build out the academic programming, and that process we predicted would take a full academic year. And so the thought is that if the board had adopted that recommendation on November, that we could then begin immediately to start that process. And we had talked about hiring a facilitator to help us with getting community and staff feedback, focus groups, surveys, all of that work, in addition to working with national experts on the language immersion component part of it. Because, we have had a K-8 model in Columbus City Schools since the two schools were created, but we have never had a middle school, a standalone middle school program. And we've never had a high school standalone program. And one of the concerns from the administration, at least, and I think we verbalized it with the task force, is that given the new state requirements for graduation and curriculum requirements, we want to have a true K-12 immersion experience for our students, but we also have to balance that desire with the state requirements for students to get a high school diploma. And some of the things that, some of the courses that we offer for high school graduation is offered in the middle school. And so being able to make sure that we don't create something that is strong fidelity-wise, but doesn't allow them to get their high school diploma would be self-defeating. And so we thought that those type of issues and questions would need further study, and we didn't want to try and conduct that type of information gathering and study in that normal, because typically when we would go through this process, the board typically would vote in November, then the administration would begin the process of implementing that recommendation over the second semester, so that recommendation would be ready to go in the fall of the next year, the next school year. So if you're following me, if the board had voted this recommendation in November of 2018, our normal pattern would be to have that program up and running by September or August of 2019. And we all thought that was just unrealistic given the academic components. And so the idea of having a year of study was a part of the recommendation that was made to the board in terms of implementing. So the year of study would have happened during the academic year of 1920, but as I said, we would have started right after the vote was made, and so we would have had all of this, the remainder of this school year, all of 19 and 20, and then the summer as well of 20 to get ready for a startup of the program in August of 2020.
So if I'm understanding then, this recommendation was put forth without any study.
Of the academic component.
On the academic components. Yes. This is just solely on the building moves. And even if the board would have approved this, it may not have actually been implemented if the academic portion would not have been viable.
Mr. President, to Ms. Adair, I don't believe that's what would have happened, no.
Okay.
Because I don't believe that would have happened because of the commitment we have to the K-12 language immersion program, okay? And again, I've been to conferences where other states who have the same sort of graduation requirements of a you know, an exit exam in order to get your diploma, where they have strong language immersion programs. And so I don't think that would have been an issue. It's just a matter of being able to implement it to as much fidelity as possible was the question we were struggling with. And what it would look like was what we were struggling with, and we did not have the answers. And let me just say, as a point of clarification, that this is my 4th school closing process that I've been a part of. We have never presented detailed academic programming as a part of the recommendations. That process has always occurred after the recommendations have been approved by the Board of Education.
And I'm not saying
no,
that's incorrect.
But I just want to
was
clarify.
just trying to understand the process.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that point, that we have always given conceptions and ideas, and then we get into the details of creating the program.
Okay, so back to my original question though, was could you, maybe the question is could you, understanding now the things that need to be studied, is there a way to provide the community a better plan or timeline, and it could be 5-year timeline, I don't know, about all the things that need to be done and studied so that families can start considering and planning for their children's future and where their children will attend middle school. Is that something that you could do?
Yeah, I mean, that can be a part of the work we do, yes.
Board Member Ragland and then Board Member
I
Gibbs.
guess my question would be, why isn't it a part of the work already? I guess that's where I'm kind of confused about all of this. I mean, we can come up with new questions about, you know, what we need to see before we make a choice and all of, I mean, we can do this month after month after month after month. And in the meantime, parents get frustrated and they pull their children out of the district. And, you know, for me, I feel like we've done this wrong enough to where we should be at a place where we're doing it right. And, you know, my question has always been about the decision-making process and how we do these things. I mean, if we've done this several times before and no decisions were made, what did we do to improve the process this time? And, you know, I'm hearing from very frustrated people who are at the point of pulling their children out of our district, going elsewhere, because we have again failed to provide them with an adequate timeline to help move their child into a place of comfort academically. We can no longer continue to do this. And, you know, I need to see some efficiencies. I need to see some things that make us more nimble. I need to see some things that make us more efficient and have some better communication mechanisms to our parents. This is extremely frustrating to me.
Mr. President, to Mr. Ragland, my recommendation would be to revisit your policy 7105, because your policy does not require that sort of academic planning prior to those decisions being made. And that's why I wanted to go over 7105 in this meeting, to make it clear that this policy has always been a short-term process and solution. It has never been because when you talk about those type of academic decisions and planning being made, you're talking about months in order to do that. Absolutely. Because again, in this scenario with the language immersions especially, you're talking, at least in my opinion, if you're going to do that right, then you enlist the assistance and help of experts in language immersion programs in order to help us build that academic programming and curriculum. And so this policy 7105 has traditionally been used as a short-term policy to address underutilization. And that's what it has always been utilized. Now, when you look at subparagraph A, educational programming, that educational programming is just making sure that you have some consistency and some program efficacy of what's being presented, not detailed planning of what that programming is going to look like. And so if that's what the board now wants, my recommendation is to revisit your policy and make that a part of the criteria.
It may be a good discussion in PRC, perhaps.
Oh, absolutely.
Board Member Gibbs, I believe you were next.
We can tag team that. It's very apparent that that change needs to come. But I want to point a clarification, Dr. Stanford. Are you saying because it's not changed that we're not going to get that information, or we're not, that it can't happen? Or are you saying moving forward, if we want it on the front end, we should change the policy so that the process flows along with that in mind? Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Baker to Ms. Gibbs, absolutely.
Okay.
Because remember when I went through the policy, I identified the last criterion says other variables. Mm-hmm. And so every time we've gone through this process, the board has had the opportunity to identify other variables it wants considered as a matter of what the task force should work on. And that's why I went through the resolution that the board adopted in February, because academic program planning was not one of those other things identified that was in that resolution.
Right. Thank you, and thank you for that. And one of the challenges, I think, with this recommendation, and why I thank my colleagues for us taking time to look at it, is because we're moving not traditional, but specialized academic programs. And so we're not just moving a traditional school to a traditional school. We're dealing with language immersion. We're dealing with merging our global program. We're dealing with French and Spanish, and another program that we've never fully developed. So I think we'd be remiss to talk about it, and I think you captured it well, but in saying that this one was a promise made but one not kept. These languages, and I guess we'll move to the next one, but they were promised a K-8, and we, in the middle, moved their K-8 program to a K-6. And trying to support a program that the family and the communities didn't support. So we moved international to a 712 just to keep it open and to try to drive an attendance that never came. So it would be disingenuous of us to say that that we didn't compromise a very successful K-8 program to what you said, and you captured it very well. What we've heard, even as of late, they want a more developed immersion program that we have seen in national conferences and workshops, but it's going to take money, investment, and study to do. But to your point, had we passed it and we said everyone has to move by 2020, we would have moved everybody by 2020 and figured it out along the way. That's what I've seen us do, and we just kind of move in motion, and would be more concerned about making sure we met a deadline as opposed to moving it. And even in our best intentions, that's what I've seen us do. So I'm glad that you're proposing taking the time to work it out and get the information. I would offer to Board Member Ragland's point and to your concern, that we work to get it right. Where we normally say, let's vote to move you, and then we'll figure out the details later. This is too critical, because we can lose too many students if we don't get the French Emergent, Spanish Emergent, Dominion, CAS, North, Global. If we don't get this right, there are too many students and too many vulnerable students that can be impacted. So I thank you for taking the time to really think this through. And when you bring the information back for the high school piece, it would just be, for me, again, the number of global students that are in the building. And could international and Dominion fit in North? If we didn't move international, if we kept international there, could Dominion and international fit in North? And both of those communities, one gets to stay where they want to be, and the other one gets to go where they want to be. Could that fit in a fiscal piece?
Mr. Brown, did you have your hand up?
That's my question.
I do.
Yes,
I
Mr.
do.
Brown.
A few things. And this has been something that's been important to me from the time I first decided to come on the board. I do feel that there is a significant misunderstanding by many board members about our role versus the role of the administration. We can work from concepts. I believe that we had all of the information that we needed and properly should have to be able to make these decisions on the task force recommendations based on the work that they did for over 6 months. It was a smart, thorough group of people that went through that. You know, we're not any smarter than they are. We don't have any more expertise than they do. They had the support of the same administrative staff that we do. I think that we could have appropriately acted and supported those recommendations back in November as we had planned to. The level of detail that board members are asking for now goes well beyond that and gets into administrative matters that I don't think we as a board have any business getting into, that we can make those conceptual decisions on the plan, and then the administration will engage and focus resources, administrative resources, on making sure it works and academically works, which is our administrator's job, and we need to trust them to do that. And we need to trust them to say, look, there's no possibility this can work. Or as Dr. Stanford did a short time ago in response to Ms. Adair, say, yes, those things are workable. That when we work on the administrative implementation and the academic program, it's about the best way to make it work, which are professional administrative decisions, not board decisions. And we don't need to know those things before making the decisions. So I just question where we're going with this, except that as I hear it, it puts substantial additional burdens on our administration, which we ought not do, causing study and gathering information that is not part of what we need to be looking at, and taking the focus off the many other important tasks that the administration has to do, such as dealing with us being an F school district and getting past that while we're dealing with these issues. I think we need to trust them, trust the administration to do its job, and certainly oversight's fine, but not the degree of questioning and studying that I hear being asked for. What it all does is divert administration from other priorities and delays getting decisions on the matters that are in front of us. People, I don't think, need every bit of detail answered before we act. I think they want answers, and they think they want us to move forward one way or another. So I just, have some difficulty with where this appears to be headed.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I do believe that there were some other comments from board members as it relates to relocation of North to Global. Board Member Reyes?
Thank you. So my questioning to your point, Board Member Brown, is this task force shall consider appropriate factors such as number A, educational program, i.e. efficacy of educational program at a building, accommodation of any planned educational program in the schools remaining open or moving to. Board policy. So that's where my questions are coming. I was on the board when we made the decision as board members to create this North International building that did not meet the expectations and the promises that we made to these specific parents from the Spanish immersion and the French immersion, as stated by Dr. Stanford at the very beginning of this comment. So I do believe that there are questions that need to be looked at, and there has to be fidelity. And what I would, to Mrs. Adair's question, is at the end of the day, if it doesn't fit, would we pull it? In our experience, as my experience since 2009, in most cases, we don't. In most cases, we continue to go through and we make it fit. So as a board member that sees those things and then comes back and sees the impact of those decisions on our children, on our teachers, and on our fidelity of academic programmings, in merging 3 schools that are currently our top schools. They're not Fs. These are Cs. ECOL, Dominion, and Spanish immersion. So anything that we do that may impact that will impact our overall grade as an F. So if we're not being cautious and deliberate in the questions that we're asking, and maybe we need to make sure that we're a little bit higher, but these are concerns. I've had the opportunity to talk to some of our parents, and they are concerned as when you merge these, what is the impact of class sizes? One of the reasons that probably we have some of these programs that have very good high grades is they do have the advantage of having perhaps some of more adequate class sizes. That doesn't mean that everybody deserves to have a class size of 15 where you get one-on-one. That's not the best use of our funding. But what is the impact on class size when you merge these 3 programs? What is the fidelity, to your point, Dr. Stanford, of the 6 to 8 language true immersion program? We talked about bus time. When we move our students, what is that bus time? We talk about, I think some of our parents, again, are concerned because of the promises not kept. Are we going to have dedicated advanced language classes? Will we have core classes offered in French and in Spanish? These are children that do want to proceed into international studies. These are children that do want to move to France, to Spain, to other countries to be effective and contribute, or perhaps want to work in an organization here that does business abroad. We all know the difficulty of getting fluent teachers in French and in Spanish. Fluent teachers in French and in Spanish. What are our resources and what is our dedication when we make that new move that we're able to do that? And one question that kind of sparked, I think there was a question about merging sports don't we recently, what does that impact? Don't we rent the field to another school? So what is that impact? So we're selling that now you're going to have sports. If we're going to have our own sports, how does that impact these other schools that we are currently partnering with and have good partnership with?
Good partnership?
And those are some of the concerns
$1 a
that
year?
I have when
I'm sorry.
I want to make sure, that's okay, that, again, we're staying true to I don't believe, to your point, that we have to go deep, 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 but when I have been in a situation where I've had to make a decision on a closing or an opening of a school, I thought A was happening. I relied on, maybe it's not an in-depth study, but when I hear a recommendation from the administrations who I believe and trust are the academic experts, I believe and trust that we have the best interests of our students, then I have to look to you to say you believe that that information is correct so that I can make the best possible decision when it's brought forward to the board. Otherwise, we serve no purpose. So that's where the multiple questions, and I can send those in writing. Dr. Stanford, I apologize. I have a lot of stuff here. I can send all those questions in writing. I can also offer you, this is one of my concerns is ECOL is showing a growth. And that's, and Dominion is showing a growth. I'm not saying that Dominion shouldn't move. Obviously, there's a case there for that. My concern, my questions are the fidelity of the immersion programs, and is that the right move to put them there? When what I hear, and I've questioned and I spoke to the administration, and I feel that parents need to speak up, is they feel they want their own language immersion program unless we can truly promise them that we're not going to do what we did before, it's pull the rug under them and say that it's a ESL versus a true language immersion program. And what I heard from them, and what even from some people on the committee, was that they felt because that was a recommendation, that's the only recommendation that we're supposed to look at. And that's the only recommendation they have. So when you're only looking at your option is to look whether this is viable, sometimes what we do is we don't look or ask the question of, this maybe doesn't make sense. Does a 6-8 just for Spanish immersion make sense? Understanding that Dominion still needs to be addressed. So I don't know if that was, from the feedback I've received, they feel like they didn't have any option but to look at just that recommendation.
Colleagues, it's about to go 7:30, and so do we have a consensus that we continue?
Yes.
All right, do you want to set a time?
No.
Or just continue? Consensus, we just carry on? Okay, colleagues, would you like to take a short break?
No.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you. And I do believe that Mr. Ragland was next. And we are looking for questions or comments specifically related to the relocation of North.
Certainly. So I want to make sure I have the timeline correct. On November 7, 2018, we passed a resolution to move forward with these recommendations. And then between November 7, 2018 and January 18, 2019, the administration received several questions from the board concerning each of the recommendations that we're discussing tonight. Is that correct?
Mr. President, to Mr. Ragland, I wouldn't say that those are questions on every recommendation. I think if you look at it, most of them are centered on, a couple of the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. And then between January 18 and January 22nd, you entertained more questions from this board regarding more detailed information that would drive tonight's discussion, correct?
Mr. Board President, to Mr. Ragland, if I'm following your question, yes, we did receive additional questions in that period, yes.
Understood, thank you. So from 11/7 to today, there's been 2 months' worth of opportunity to provide questions to the administration that we want clarity on. We had a work session planned today that we hoped we would be able to come out with some decisive information to give to the public about specifically recommendation number 3. And here we are with even more questions. When are we going to get to the point where we are making a decision? I'm not sure what else is needed. And you know, I mean, why didn't we ask these questions we're asking tonight between 11/7 and January 22nd? I just, you know, that to me was the opportunity, particularly when the administration is asking us to provide them with information with specificity that would drive this night's discussion to some sort of a completion, not more questions, more studies for them, more work for them. We've had a year's worth of a task force that has brought us back information that we can go on. We've had an administration follow that up with even more clarifying questions. What is the reluctance to move forward with a decision? Help me understand that, because I'm watching people leave this district. I am watching people walk out because we do not make a stand and make a decision that helps impact their children. Help me understand why we've got to go through this process once again, because what's going to happen, they're going to go back, they're going to study, they're going to answer these questions, and we'll be back here again next month not making a decision. We are at a very vulnerable time right now in this city with this district. As leaders of this district, it is imperative that we start taking some action, particularly when we're losing the trust of this community because of inaction. So I need to hear from my colleagues now. I don't need to hear from Dr. Stanford anymore. I need to hear from us.
To your board colleagues.
Yes, my question is directed to my board colleagues, because we need to be the ones talking right now.
Okay, all right. Anyone like to provide any feedback? Mr. Brown, I see you there.
Yeah. I agree fully with Mr. Ragland. Task force of wide variety of people from the community studied this for over half a year. They studied all of the different questions that were necessary, and they made a strong recommendation to this board. Well, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. They made a strong recommendation to the superintendent. The superintendent, in turn, recommended strongly to this board that we approve and adopt those recommendations from the task force. We had, in November, at the time that we scheduled, all of the information that was needed to be able to make the decisions that Mr. Ragland is now saying we need to act on. And I agree that I can't explain the delay. I can't explain why at November 7th meeting, where I was not present or able to be present, the board decided not to consider the task force report. And, you know, I think it's something that we need to get to, the sooner the better. I think we have all the information we need. And I think we should act on it and support the task force recommendations and the recommendations of our administration. I just agree that I don't understand.
Other comments, colleagues? Board Member Gibbs?
You want me to hear that? I can say this. Thank you. Thank you for those comments, and thank you, Board Member Ragland, and in joining us. I would address just a few things that you offer. One, this is not an intentional delay for action. It is a very intentional deliberation to have discussion and to make sure we understand fully what we're doing and how it will impact students. While you may have enough information, every board member needs to be very comfortable and needs to have the information they need to vote and move forward. Because what we are going to do is going to change lives, it's going to change families, it's going to change choices. And as you've heard in some discussion, and I'm sure they'll provide in written detail, we can totally destroy a high school feeder pattern. So when you talk about people losing or leaving us for a lack of trust, some of them come from us making bad decisions. And in this one, I don't want to make a bad decision. So I want to understand all of the factors that go into us moving so many parts at one time just to, this isn't an academic move. This came out of the facility house. And so because it impacts so many academic programs, for me, I don't want to feed the charter schools. I don't want to feed the exit. And if we don't do this right, we will feed the exit. You weren't accurate, Board Member Brown, in saying we did not consider the report. We fully considered the report, and we made, I'm sorry, I'm talking though. So I'm going to say not accurate because we considered the report, we heard it, it came to the board, and we intentionally made sure we spent more time so you could be here for this conversation so that we could talk about these particular recommendations that people in the community were divided on. The community wasn't unified in what they wanted. And so the difference between the task force is they can consider a few recommendations. The difference of the board is we have 50,000 people. We have the moral imperative, and it's higher. While their work is done, ours is not. And we have to consider every single student, every single person that is going to be a part of this. And why do we need to make and see these decisions? Is so that when we finally make it, and they know what they, administration brings us something, it's very clear that we're going to vote on a decision. There is no decision we're going to make that is going to make everybody happy, right? We can make one that's not damaging. And in getting information, because we're going to solve one set of problems, but in that discussion we had in February and in November, we haven't addressed the overcrowding at Woodward Park. We haven't addressed it. We got 10 more schools with modulars on their lawns. So while the task force did a good job, they still didn't finish the job. That's why we are the board who have to continue to look at the options of making the best learning environments for all students. COS, they said fix it with no directives. So we still have to get to how do we address that. So I appreciate the work of the task force. It is hard. I did a 6-month stint on facilities master plan. Nobody walked away with that. It wasn't 100% agreement, but we came up with the plan. So is the same with this. So if you are already where you're at and you know how you're going to vote, cool, sit there, be quiet. But if you want to hear some, until everyone gets the information that they need to feel comfortable with voting on it, it's a matter of making sure we have the best data possible to make the best decision possible. And then we'll make the vote, and we won't make everyone happy. But what we will do is be done. What I haven't heard, and what I haven't heard up until now, because those are I asked my questions off rip. So they've had my questions since November, since we started the process, since we've been on the board table. I can't speak for everyone else, but knowing how we have done in the past and knowing all the impacts these make, we can make a great decision right now, or we can make one where we're going to end up closing 3 more buildings and losing a program. So that's my due diligence of wanting to make sure I understand all of the pieces and parts and making sure as the administration brings it forward, we understand what
it's going to look like. I don't need to know the exact detail, but I don't want to be surprised on the back end when we thought we voted for something and it turns out to be something else. That is the distraction that is currently in our immersion program. That is what is driving the low enrollment in our program, which is what's bringing us here to this recommendation today. So that's just me.
Mr. Cole?
Thank you, and I'll try and be as quick as possible. First and foremost, I apologize. I had to leave. I had a family emergency that, praise the Lord, was rectified, and now I'm back here okay, and my wife is okay. With that stated, let me speak first and foremost from the organizational standpoint in terms of our body politic, Mr. Ragland. First and foremost, we were in the process just at the time and even post the decision that we made November 7th of looking for new board members, looking for new people like yourself that we have every faith and confidence in to be able to hear us out, gather some institutional understanding of how we come to decision, and I'll go to that very briefly. But we were doing that work of making sure that we had the right body politic in place to be able to make these decisions. On November 7th, might I add, we scheduled a work session specifically for this day. So this has not been a situation, my dear community and my dearest colleagues, this has not been a situation of paralysis by virtue or disvirtue of analysis. This is not that situation. Let me further say this. I speak from personal experience. I am one of those people, the Cole family is one of those families that at the time that my children were attending a Cole Kenwood were there at the promise of students attending as K through 8 students. K through 8. Now, I will not wear, own, imbibe the drink of why every family who decided to take their children out of my school district, I'm not going to own that. I'm not. I absolutely, vehemently refuse. If you made a decision at your kitchen table to say that this district was not the best place for your children, then you made that decision. I made the decision for my children to stay in Columbus City schools. I believe in the product. I know what it's done for my children and their friends. I beat that drum as loudly as I can everywhere I go. Not just for our children, but for our staff, from the teachers to the custodian to the bus driver to food service. Let me be clear. So I can't own why everybody else decided to leave. What I can do in this decision here is make a very clear, sober, thoughtful, engaged decision about why it is we want to consolidate a building in a way that, again, can impact the feeder pattern, can impact opportunity academically and otherwise for our children. So we have to be very cautious of the language that we use and the spirit of rambunctious. You know, I won't use that example, but we cannot be rambunctious in this decision making. So we took very measured steps first and foremost to ensure that we had the right folk at the table to be able to make this decision, number one. Number two, to ensure that we've got enough information so that we know that our children have what they need, the staff have what they need, and that this aligns to our strategic plan. There's alignment to our facilities master plan, that there's alignment to what it is that is our aim to get from where we are to next to best. And this is all a part of that conversation. It is not separate. It is all inclusive. It is all inclusive when we look at it from budget assumptions. So the very questions we ask community about the Morse Road space or the Opportunity Center that we have, those all have fiscal assumptions They all have behavioral fiscal assumptions that are assigned to our student achievement, to the programs that we have, that we want to support and engage in that. So just understand, I really want us to level off, and I applaud your passion. That's why you're here. Make no mistake about it. That's why you're here. So I applaud your passion. But let's not go at each other. Let's figure out what we're here to do. I will close by saying this. I came here, I said it at the top of the meeting, I came here to be decisive. I came here so that my community knows that we are ready to make some sort of decision or give them impart some sort of hope or faith that we are going to move forward with something, that we're going to move forward with this move to Dominion or not, or that we're going to move forward with a new building and additional interim space for Columbus Alternative High School. So I am here to say, as Michael Cole, that I am supportive of this move from Dominion to Columbus North International. I am supportive of our high school students finding better, more abundant space at Brookhaven the old Brookhaven High School. I'm supportive of that. I am. But I want to be clear that, again, that we're going to have firm fidelity to the program. I know what it's done for my own children and her friends. 4.2 GPA, fluent in French, Mandarin. Her friends are graduating fluent in Japanese, fluent in Mandarin, Arabic, Russian. These kids could graduate that school and have a job tomorrow, at minimum making $30 grand a year in somebody's call center. For a child that age, that's money. I might as well be a millionaire, especially if I'm living at home with my mother and father. So I want to be clear, y'all. I'm ready. I'm happy to make a decision. But at the same time, we've got to ask the questions, and we've got to get some measure of clear answer. But we have to do it with collaborative mindedness, and let's not go at each other. I just think we've had poor example of that in the past, and that time is over. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Speaking of questions, perhaps we could get back to questions related to final recommendation number 3. Are there any other questions related to final recommendation number 3? Is your hand up, Mr. Ragland?
Yes, it is. Can we call for the vote? If everybody wants to make a decision tonight, let's call the vote.
Mr. Ragland, we can't because we did not notice that we would take action this evening. So that's not an option for us this evening. However, we can come to some consensus on a timeline as to when we might like to schedule a vote subsequent to response from the administration.
Let's have that discussion.
Do you want to have that discussion now, or do you want to have that discussion after we've concluded going through the final item?
Let's conclude. Let's get through cause.
Carry on? Okay. We'll come back to that. All right, so are there other questions as it relates to final recommendation number 3? Anything on relocating Dominion Middle School to North High School? Any other discussion on immersion programs? This is all part of final recommendation number 3.
Quick question.
Yes, Ms. Gibbs.
So we're down to the end of number 3. My question is around, to the point, and when you bring back the information for us, around the idea that we gave French and Spanish immersion just one option. I don't know if there's a cost-benefit analysis, if French, Spanish immersion, and Hubbard went into their own middle school. I think I heard Board Member Reyes said that. Would that be an option for them to go into their own school? Or as a point of clarification, did they need to move into North to make the numbers work? I wasn't very clear if we were moving them there so that the building would be at capacity, or if they didn't move, could Dominion still feel North International, and the immersion programs in Hubbard consider building another language-focused middle school pathway independently. You can bring that back later.
Mr. President, to Ms. Gibbs, I do have a question of clarification. When you say, is it an option for Spanish immersion and ECOLE to have their own school for middle school, are you asking, is it possible for ECOLE to have a French middle school and for Spanish immersion?
No. For French, Spanish, and Hubbard.
In one location.
Could they?
And it would be the Mandarin Chinese at Hubbard as well.
Right, the Mandarin.
So all three would be in one middle school?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking? Okay.
I'm not sure if that was considered, but what would that be if they went into a building by themselves? And the clarification question is, do all of those schools need to feed into the Dominion building to make the facilities capacity number work? So if only Dominion moved into North High School, would it be at a capacity where it would be safe from closure, right? Would it meet the capacity number by itself, or does another school need to go into North with it to bring it to the capacity enrollment number? That I'm not sure.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs.
And, wait a minute, and one more. One more for that. When you bring that back, if I'm right, could you answer if Dominion just has all of its elementary schools feeding into it, it doesn't have any preferred pathways? Like if you go to Ames, you can automatically matriculate into Fort Hays. Dominion doesn't have that, but if that would be an option, I guess that would be a question. I withdraw that question. I'll ask that in a different space.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs.
Thank you.
Board Member Adair?
Thank you. I know that we have talked a lot about the language programs, but one of the reasons that we're here on this recommendation was the overcrowding of Dominion itself. And so are there other solutions for Dominion? I know that we are against modulars. And what are the plans for Dominion if they don't move to address the overcrowding issue that does not incorporate the change of the feeder pattern? And secondly, if we think that maybe after study this would work, per your recommendations and your expertise as the administration, is it possible to move Dominion, or maybe not move everyone at the same time, but move Dominion first to the North Building to alleviate the overcrowding sooner as we work out the span or the program, the academic programming?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions related to final recommendation number 3? Okay. Very good. Superintendent, would you like to carry on into the cause question?
I do have one one point of clarification to ask related to recommendation number 3, because as a result of the conversation, I'm still a little bit fuzzy on, is it the board's intention for us to answer all of the academic programming concerns and questions that we have heard as a part of this study? And the reason I'm asking is because, it was our estimate that it would take us a year to do that as a part of the initial recommendation. And so are we being asked to do that type of in-depth programmatic analysis to bring back to the board as a part of this study?
I don't believe so, but let me just look around the table.
Okay.
No, I don't think anybody anticipates you to do that.
I was going to ask that question, like, we've asked for a lot to the point. I think based on our questions, what I would like to see, again, you guys have academic background. You have 2 immersion principals who understand, and I think I shared with you that both have gone out and gotten some best practice information. I think there's information in the district that can be utilized, and I just want to feel comfortable that we've done some due diligence. I don't think you need to come back and say it looks like this or it looks like that, and maybe when you look into it a little bit more thoroughly, considering those questions, is you may come back with what Mr. Dare just stated is, you know what? We need to address A, which is Dominion. So we're going to move that forward. We're going to continue to utilize this whole year to say, does it make sense to move the immersion program with them, or does it make sense, or does it make sense to do the middle school or leave them as is? So I just want to ensure that in that year, what I don't want is what we've had before, and at times is we're going to make it fit. I rather the administration come back and say, you know what, we did our due diligence, and it does not make sense, but this makes sense, or have we considered this? Or maybe it is, we've done it before, we go slowly. You bring in the 6th and you work out the kinks, and you bring in the 7th and you work out the kinks, and you bring in the 8th instead of bringing 3 grades straight in. So I think there's alternatives to how we do it and moving forward, and that's, it's a broader brush that I'd like to see.
Mr. President, to Ms. Reyes, I guess the way I would interpret what you just said, and I want to put this out on the floor to see if I can get some consensus on what you are telling us, because I still don't feel like I have a consensus understanding of what you're expecting to be brought back as a part of the immersion program. If you're saying to us that as a part of this study, if you can come back to us and say with confidence that it is possible to have a middle school immersion program and a high school immersion program given our regulatory structure in the state of Ohio, meaning that students have to pass exit exams in order to get their diploma, I think that can be done in a short amount of time. But if you're asking for detailed programmatic, well, and again, just hear me out, because that's this is what this is for. Yeah. It's for you to give me clarity and give us clarity, not me, to give us as an administrative team clarity on what should be done in the short term. And so I see a lot of heads shaking that no, you're not looking for that detailed programmatic analysis, that you're looking for something that's a little bit more high level. And so is what I described in essence saying, is a middle school language immersion program and a high school language immersion program possible under our regulatory scheme? Is that enough for us to bring back as a part of this study?
And what does it look like? What's the best way that it looks like?
What does it look like different from now? I mean, we have this now. I'm sorry, Mr. President. We have it
when
now.
you say and I'm right, when you say what does it look like, what are you saying to us? When you say, because when you say what does it look like, I guess what I'm hearing is that, well, we're talking about a middle school. It's a middle school program and it's a high school program. So when you say what does it look like, what are you saying to us?
Is it separate from Dominion, or is it together with Dominion? Is that?
Okay. So you're looking at, is it co-located, or is it a standalone program?
Board Member Ragland.
Or you leave it alone?
I just wanted 10 seconds. So I'm reading this. Forgive me for being naive. This says final recommendation number 3. Is that recommendation coming from the administration or from the facilities task force?
Mr. President, to Mr. Ragland, it is a recommendation of the facilities task force through the superintendent or the interim superintendent.
So am I to read that the superintendent, the interim superintendent, would not have approved this recommendation if this was not the approved approach from the administration?
Mr. President, to Mr. Ragland, if I understand your question appropriately, when I say it's the facilities task force recommendation through the superintendent, it's my interpretation of the policy, and having been through the process, that the superintendent does have the flexibility, right, to reject the recommendation of the task force. Has that ever been done? No, not since I've been here. But I do believe that the way that this is structured, if the superintendent, and in this case, me, if I felt like there was a serious safety issue related to the recommendation to the staff or the students, or if there was a serious programmatic issue, academic programmatic issue related to the recommendation, that I didn't feel comfortable it being recommended to the board, then yes, I would have stepped forward and say, this is one that I don't think should be brought forward. That is not the case with recommendation number 3.
And so my suggestion to my colleagues would be that we trust in the better judgment of the man that we hired to oversee this process, who's brought forth this recommendation, and we move forward, understanding that we have an administration in place that can solve the issues as we guide them. But let's make a decision. Thank you.
Mr. Ragland. Any other comments related to final recommendation number 3, Mr. Vice President?
Mr. President, my 10-second comment is again, the biggest piece for me, outside of what I've already mentioned in terms of fidelity to the programming and how that transitions to the high school, is strategic plan. How does this fall into our surge? How does this fall into the things that we have in place at current that are going to propel our students, propel our buildings, and improve building culture and climate? How does this tie into our strategic plan as you've already, in many instances, developed? I mean, we've got a very strong framework already in place. How does this fall into that? That's it, Mr. President. Thank you.
Oh, Dr. Stanford.
Mr. President, to Mr. Cole, when you say how does this tie into the strategic plan, are you talking about recommendation number 1 and recommendation number 3, or just recommendation number 3?
I'm talking about recommendation number 1 and 3.
And 3. And the alternative sites for COS as well?
Absolutely.
All 3? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes, thank you, President Baker, Dr. Stanford. I wanted to answer your question around our expectations of data. For me, I understand that the lengthy review and study of the immersion and the new immersion program and format, that might take a long time, but some of the answers around facilities, capacity, some of the reports, that information, I just want to be clear, I think that we can get readily. I would want to hear that information. I think when you bring back the list, as you always do, if these are all the things you ask, we can see very clearly what would take a very long time to do, but there are some things that we can answer very much in the short term. And most of these questions, some of them came from us, but most of these came through us from the committee over these last few months. So the urgency of making the decision, the advocacy for maintaining the fidelity of the foreign language programs, all of these, as we have heard, are questions that we have gathered not just from us, but from our community, our parents, and our students, as we have heard. So those things that we can answer, and even in some of the stretch that we can work on, I would want those to come back within 30 days. And the other ones that are going to take a long time, I think are going to take a long time because eventually we will need to answer them. We will need to look at our programming and look at our offerings, and they may not be the short-term answer, but they're going to require answers for our community in terms of the sustainability and the viability of all of those specialized programs. And as we know in what we're studying in our academic portfolio, there's even more to be answered. But since this is in the confines of the facilities and enrollment and capacity, those that answer those that would directly impact these decisions are the ones I would want to come back.
Very good. Thank you, colleagues. Oh, Board Member Adair.
So Well, I have the privilege now of sitting on this side of the table when just a few weeks ago I was part of the community on that side of the table. And I want to just say that I think what happened here is that we have mushed two processes together. And now we're kind of in a dilemma because we had the facilities task force look at recommendations, and as you started with what it was we could look at from board policy 7105, and you said that academic programming, especially specialized programming, was something that wasn't considered. And sitting on the other side of the table, it did feel that it was very data-driven, which is fine, but data only tells one side of the story. And so we have to make sure that when we are looking at this decision, we are making a holistic decision. And now giving you the opportunity to really dig in and create an innovative, top-notch program that is going to draw students back to the district for our language program. So we have a Dominion issue that is overcapacity, and we have a program academic issue over here. And so I think we can maybe split them apart a little bit and work on overcrowding and facilities, giving you time to really dig in and make a top-notch program, and do the research you need and you know, get all that together while still alleviating the problem of overcrowding. And so, you know, that's where I kind of stand. I can make a decision, but I want to ensure that what I'm making a decision about, especially on that academic side, has been, you're not going to have the answers now because I want you to take the time to study it, but I want to make sure that we are, at least in our planning that out. What does that look like? So that the community understands the process going forward that we are going to use. And so that's kind of where I am at this point. We're not voting tonight, James, because that's not the way the rules work. But Shauna, I think we maybe can come to a decision a little bit faster than the 30 days. And I think we can make one that really takes into the holistic considerations of everyone, alleviating the facility problem of Dominion and putting a plan of action in place to provide the top-notch, innovative language program for our students and families.
All right, very good. Let's then move on from final recommendation number 3 to the question of cause. Superintendent?
Okay. What are you laughing at? Columbus Alternative High School. Okay, to give the board a little bit of a preview and background, Columbus Alternative High School, for the Facilities Task Force process, we used an enrollment number of 775, and that was a 4-year average because we did not want to, focus in on current enrollment because that fluctuates throughout the entire year. So we utilized a 4-year enrollment. For capacity, we used 903, and that represented 88% utilization of the building. The facility condition index is at 98%, and that was the number that was used during the process. Programmatic needs, we definitely had conversations and have looked at that we have a IB program there. COS is a college preparatory program, and I would say a rigorous college preparatory program. It is a program that has a very robust drama program and a very robust music program as well, as a part of the programmatic needs. And so, and they do not have athletics at their school. And so, looking at alternative facility sites, we don't have to worry about football fields, tracks, and all of that, but we do need to have some type of athletic space, if you will, for gym, because that's still an academic curriculum requirement as a part of the state of Ohio's requirements, and also as a part of the Board of Education's policy requirements. And so, you know, we do have to make sure that we do have those programmatic needs in mind as we look at alternative sites, you know, for Columbus Alternative High School. During the facilities task force process, I definitely want to clear up one of the, what I think is misconceptions about that process. There seems to be a belief that COS was not a part of the facilities task force process. That was not the case. Every building, every administrative building, and every school building in the district was a part of the process. And what I mean by that, every facility in the district was put through these factors that were in board policy. For the administrative spaces, there was an alternative set of factors that were identified because this policy only focuses in on school buildings. And so there was an alternative set of factors that were developed by the facilities task force to look at administrative spaces. And I don't have those with me. I should have brought them with me, but we will make that available to the board after the meeting so that you can see what those factors were that were identified and utilized. And so the discussion around COS as a part of the process, it was looked at as a part of all the buildings going through these factors. But then after we went out and had the community forums, there was additional consideration of COS, and there was consideration of alternative spaces or alternative ideas that were submitted by the community as a part of the community feedback that we received. And so the task force did consider those alternative ideas. The three specific ideas that were considered was to relocate COS to East High School, to relocate COS to Lyndon McKinley High School, and to relocate COS at the North High School site on Arcadia. All three sites were discussed, debated, and ultimately were not approved by the task force. The task force opted in favor of approving the Dominion recommendation as a part of the final recommendations that were submitted to the Board of Education. And so again, this idea that COS was not considered as a part of this process is not accurate in my opinion. And because of the debate on the task force about COS, you may recall that the task force pulled together what they call the Words of Wisdom document. That Words of Wisdom document represented the things that were debated and discussed that the committee felt very strongly about, but they did not recommend or they felt was beyond their authority as a task force to deal with. But they wanted the board to know that those issues or those concerns were important to the task force, and they felt the board should have further discussion about those issues. And so there is a part of that Words of Wisdom that the task force spoke to COS and making sure the board understood that the task force felt that, yes, there should be a long-term solution developed for COS, and that it should be developed sooner rather than later. And I think that, you know, kind of summarizes, you know, the task force's point on that. And so, with that, I think the biggest questions for us as an administration when it comes to COS is looking at, when you look at the resolution, and it speaks to identify interim alternative location solutions. One of the questions from the administration is, how are we defining interim? Are you looking at that as being a temporary site until a new building can be built? Are you saying a temporary site until renovations can be made at the school? When you say interim, what is that definition of interim?
Colleagues, are there thoughts? Board Member Gibbs?
Yes,
And the board member who made that is no longer here, but it was a well-placed amendment. From what I understand and what have I experienced at COS, their building, the building at COS, even right now, even in 20 degrees, is overheated. So from what I understand, they want temporary space until a brand new building is built. When we talk about alignment of our processes, in the facilities master plan, COS is up next to be built. So they were already in line to have a brand new building. But as of late, and as of our weather pattern and environment, it has become brutally discomfortable in their building. And so I believe that amendment, and I support the spirit of the amendment, is there a place they can swing to now while they are waiting for a new building to be built, which is what caused the conundrum around space and what facility that you just pointed out, who has the space to accommodate all of COS swinging to it at one time. And I understand that it says 903, that it has a capacity of 903. You're talking about, we even need to reexamine that number, because you're talking about putting 903 adult bodies into an elementary school with all of the elementary amenities that we've seen. So even that number is not viable in the 700. And I would want to know what the capacity is this year, even though they average 775. They start out pretty much higher. So what I would want to know from if we're going to follow the task force, and they say none of those three are options, what are our options? Where can COS swing until we build their new building?
So, Ms. Gibbs, your interpretation of interim is swing COS out sometime soon and keep them swung out until they have a new building.
Until they have a new building.
Okay, colleagues, do we have an agreement that that's what we mean? I see heads shaking.
If I may, one
Yes,
follow-up.
yes.
When the board says soon, are you speaking this semester, or are you saying for the new school year?
Ms. Gibbs?
Moves take time, like we understand that. Moves take time. And building a building can take up to 3 or 4 years. I don't think they could stay on McGuffey Road for 3 to 4 years. So we're not talking about something that's undoable or disruptive or, not feasible. In the soonest feasible time, they're thinking, how can we swing? But what are the options? Like, I don't know what space, where can they swing to if they move now? And even if we were building a new building next year in the facilities master plan, and we move a school into North, which is our normal high school swing space, that's where Linden swung, that's where everyone swung to North. If we now occupy that with the middle school, where do they swing?
Mr. President, to Ms. Gibbs, Mr. Trevino, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page in this regard. If a bond were put on the ballot and that bond was approved by the community, from the first shovel going into the ground for a high school, roughly, how many years would that take?
Mr. Trevino, can you come to the podium, please?
And this would be under ideal conditions, because
Right.
when you talk about building, the materials, the labor, the available labor in the market, all of those things come into play.
Design phase.
And that's what I'm asking for.
Because you said shovel,
You're right. You're right.
Design phase
Design phase
of
as
the
well.
Columbus Alternative High School.
Yes.
And so just in general, I would say for a high school, a construction period would be 2 full years. And then the design portion would be, even on a very aggressive schedule, at least a year, more likely a year and a half. And one of the things I think with the cause specifically we'd want to look at is programming. So we don't have a program in our book that we would use necessarily to apply to a cause. So I think we'd spend a little more time in terms of programming to make sure that new facility met their needs.
So 3 to 4 years?
I think that's an accurate
Thank you.
statement, yes.
Thank you. I just want to make sure the board had that information as you have this discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Ragland.
Is there an opportunity to start controlling enrollment i.e. decreasing enrollment moving forward, utilizing graduation classes that are leaving, limiting the number of students that are coming into alternative high school, to fit them into a smaller space. It says here that we've got several buildings that can fit 900 students. All of them are pretty much occupied right now. But maybe if we started controlling the number of students that can come into the school as more students graduate, we could fit them into a smaller space, maybe utilize a middle school space for the swing space to get the high schools built. If we can control at that level, is that a possibility to consider?
We will look at it as a part of our review of all the questions and get back to the board as a part of the study.
Sure. Building on that from Mr. Ragland, I understand that there have been students turned down, that there's a wait list, that there's a lot of interest in COS.
Yes.
And I believe there's been a little bit of talk of maybe we need a second program. Perhaps we can consider a second program in a different location rather than simply expanding the size, and in doing that, balance that out, decreasing the size in one place while building a program in another that could fit a smaller program.
Mr. Cole?
Thank you, Mr. President. I see here several challenges, particularly with some of the things that have been suggested. So if we're talking about minimizing or decreasing over time incrementally the admission to COS, I think that's a big challenge. I don't know that the students and or their parents or staff would really like to go that direction. When we're talking about swing space of available high school buildings, we have the issue of students themselves who have communicated to us publicly and privately that they are not interested in co-locating, so to speak, to another school and thus losing their identity. And more importantly, what happens with that big, large number of students, you end up separating that population maybe in as many as 2 or 3 buildings. But what about this? What about working with our county? What about working with our city to find an alternative asset that might be able to house those students in an incubator kind of environment, something where there can be a value add, a community value add that utilizes those students' talents, gifts, and skills, that enhances their learning experience, that opens a door of opportunity for them in the public and private sector. What if we created our own kind of incubator type of situation, maybe almost kind of like Metro in some kind of different way, but what if we looked at, the broader community and helping us identify an asset that could house all of those students? I love to see if that could even be a consideration moving forward for that group of kids. And again, how we then find a curriculum value add that puts those youngsters to work and gives them an incredible learning experience that they can carry on to the new facility.
Thank you. Mr. Ragland?
I just wanted to clarify that my suggestion for downsizing the enrollment was temporary until the new facility that could house whatever number we determined in advance was completely built. Columbus Alternative will not have a problem enrolling that building to capacity. So if we downsize to begin with, the moment that new spots open up, I am pretty much willing to guarantee that this public will respond and will be able to fill that building up back to capacity. It's a very highly sought after school. So my solution was only temporary for the purpose of fitting as the new facility was built.
Mr. Baker to Mr. Ragland, that's how I interpreted it when you said it.
Okay, thank you.
And to that question, we are at the beginning of the lottery period, correct? So if we wanted to reduce the number, we wanted to alleviate some of the overcrowding for next year, we have an opportunity with the number of slots we take right now, right? We can just simply take less right now and alleviate the space in the building. Is that, we haven't offered any slots for ninth grade other than the 3.0 students, right? The pre-lottery, selective admissions. But otherwise, if we needed to alleviate immediately the number of students in that building, we could do that for next year, correct? Because we haven't offered those slots yet?
Mr. Baker to Ms. Gibbs, yes, that is possible, but that would not be my recommendation.
Understandable, but it is possible.
It is possible.
Got it. In the facility idea about space, has the administration looked at any additional locations or any other swing space, or were you just waiting to get clarification from us?
Mr. Baker to Ms. Gibbs, yes, we've been waiting for more clarification. We have tossed around some ideas among ourselves, but we have been waiting for clarification before we actually, took definitive steps to really start narrowing this down.
Yeah. Well, I just would simply support, as we're talking about alleviating issues, that there are things that we can do administratively to alleviate it temporarily till we get to the new building, but that they do need to, I believe that they'll need an additional or alternate location before we build their building and probably before we start that process. Their conditions are deteriorating rapidly, and we're just plugging holes in an elementary school building that was never built to support high school students, let alone 900 of them on a daily basis over the period of 30 years. Like, it's not built for it. So it's no wonder that it's fallen apart. But when you bring back, options for us, that I would want to see what an immediate as it can be. Because in the FMP process, if we did nothing, they're up next to get built. But I don't think we have 6 years to give for those students to be in that building.
Mr. Baker, to the entire board, I do have some additional questions that relate to options that I'd like to put on the table for further discussion, if it's the right time. Okay. So based on this conversation, it goes back to Mr. Cole's feedback about an incubator site. Are we limited as an administration to look at only internal sites, or do we have the flexibility to look at sites outside of the district?
Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Superintendent, my thought was if we could provide a site that accommodated them, if it had to be outside the district, so mote it be. If we could provide all the necessary amenities that include transportation, food service, the whole nine, under the auspices of the district, I would love it. And see how, again, we bring to bear additional resources through whether it's Child and Family Services, whether it's workforce development, whether it's Department of Education with our wonderful city, whatever resources we can come to bear with.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, did you have a comment on that specifically?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I understood Dr. Stanford's question. When you say inside and outside, are you referring to the geographic boundaries of Columbus City Schools, or are you talking about buildings that we own versus buildings that are owned by other governmental units or by the private sector? I mean, inside, outside doesn't help me understand that fully.
Mr. President, to Mr. Brown, it's the latter.
Okay,
Not outside of the district boundaries, but looking at outside of our portfolio of buildings that we have in the district.
to both other governmental as well as perhaps private sector. Okay,
I don't believe there's any objection to that.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Thank you.
I think we're good on this one as well, but I want to ask it just to, again, make sure we've got consensus on this, and that is co-location.
Superintendent, tell us what that means.
So is the board against co-location on a temporary basis with an existing program in an existing Columbus City School building? Yes, of COS.
Is there any objection to co-location? Ms. Gibbs? Mr. Brown? Mr. Vice President?
I like to hear, I think it'd be a wonderful opportunity, maybe if we even sent out a survey to the families and students, just a brief survey. I'd love to get their entire feedback, but the feedback I've gotten in my conversations with them is that they have no interest in co-locating. But we have broader assumptions to consider. So I hear what they're saying, but we also have broader assumptions to consider. But I am amenable to what their interests are. But I like to at least get an opportunity, even if it was something electronically possible to get in response. I like to get some feedback from a broader population sample of that student body and that parent body.
Ragland?
My only knee-jerk reaction would be to support co-location at a site like Fort Hays that presents a campus environment, an opportunity for them to have their own separate building space, maybe utilize some of the other amenities that exist on the campus. But Fort Hays would be the option for me. I would not support co-location of Columbus Alternative at a standalone current high school building. With the exception, you know, I prefer the campus environment. Fort Hays would be probably my only, if you could show me what that would look like, inclusive of any type of renovation that would be necessary to make the space ready for them. That may be even a long-term solution. You know, but hey, I mean, you have your opportunity to say what you have to say. But,
Thank you, Mr. Ragland.
you know, but yeah.
I'll handle that. Mr. Brown, I do believe you were next.
I guess my wish would be that we not take away from the options that administration can look at and bring back to us, including if there are any suitable co-location, you know, we take a look at it. If you know, if we don't like how it looks, I guess that's not going to be our, you know, but at this stage, to rule that out of hand doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't know that we need to do a survey at this stage of parents or others, but you know, let's let the administration do its work.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Oh, I'm sorry, Superintendent.
So, based on what I'm hearing, this is an important question. It appears as though there is no objection. Well, the consensus is that co-location is something that we should look at.
I would say that's fair, but don't assume that it'll be well received.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, do we have the authority to look at co-location as a possible option?
Yes.
Yes, I guess my question would
Mr. Ragland?
possible option for
Yes, sir.
a temporary solution.
it's temporary.
Right,
Everything's
okay,
temporary.
yeah,
Yes,
so.
yeah.
Everything's temporary, and we've defined temporary
Right.
as swing space, meaning,
Right.
relocating them as soon as possible until a new building is built, is the definition I heard earlier.
Yes, Ms. Gibbs.
Yes, and when you bring those options, can you bring the financial, what that would cost? What that would cost? So bring the options, but you got to bring them with the numbers of what it would cost to make it work. Is it rent versus an investment versus something turnkey?
I've only got 2 more questions, and at least from our part, we will have our questions asked on COS. And I think I heard this earlier, but again, this is making sure that I'm clear. The board is not in favor of splitting up grades and putting them in different locations. Yes.
Colleagues? Okay.
And then the last, and well, I just, the last question, do we keep the Operation Fix-It plans that we have right now for CAUS on hold until decisions are made in this process?
Ms. Gibbs?
What are the Operation Fix-It plans for the building? And what would that do to the heating and cooling challenges at the school? What would that cost be, and what would it be if those dollars were appropriated then to the new location?
I was trying my best not to have staff come up and answer questions.
But
no,
they don't have to answer that.
I think this is relevant to clarification.
Yeah.
Because I asked the question. This is relevant to clarification. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Trevino to at least tell us what are the things that we've identified as a part of Operation Fix-It for COS, and what schedule do we have them on right now?
Sure. So Dr. Stanford, so the categories of Operation Fix-It work that we have scheduled for the current CAUS building are safety upgrades, fire alarm upgrades, plumbing, restroom upgrades, pavement upgrades, lighting upgrades.
And when you say paving, are you specifically talking about the parking lot?
Yeah, it would generally focus on the parking lots, but it might also include some sidewalks.
All right. And what time frame do we have them slated for right now?
So right now, the only one of those projects that we have kind of on our immediate horizon are the fire alarm upgrades, because we have been working to get all of those upgrades completed across the district. So we do have that project ready to go out for bids, but right now we are holding it pending kind of this discussion. The other projects, we have held off a little bit, and we'll be working on those over the next 2 years.
Okay.
Estimate.
Do you have an estimated, based on the Operation Fix-It plan that we have, do you have an estimated total number of what we're looking at for those items?
I don't have that with me at the moment, no.
We can provide that to the board with our responses.
Mr. Vice President?
Yes, sir. Mr. Trevino, before you dart off, and thank you for that preliminary information. With exception to the pavement piece, would you say the capital and improvements that you're looking at in Project Fix-It are largely compliance-oriented measures that would also assist with kind of mothballing the building too? But I want to more focus on the compliance. You mentioned fire, you mentioned plumbing, some of those rough mechanical type things. Is that around a compliance measure largely?
Board President, to Mr. Cole, I would consider that beyond a question of clarification.
Got you.
And
Okay.
I would ask
And-
that you allow us to respond to that question
Cool.
with our response.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Because that's a tough question to answer on the spot.
No worries, no worries.
So I just want to say that I am really excited for the future of CAUSE. And I'm really excited about this process that every single person in our community is going to go through to help CAUSE get a new building. We cannot do it by ourselves as this board. We need people out there who are ready to fight for our students. I want CAUSE students to be involved in this process, understanding that those current students right now will not see this benefit, but they are working towards the future of those kids coming after them. They will learn so much from this process in terms of how municipalities work, how partnerships are built, and how we levy and use our assets to advocate for ourselves. So I really want to encourage you to get our students involved. I want to encourage you to really take a look at what Board Member Cole said about finding innovative partnerships and working with our city and our county and our businesses, because CAUSE is a gem. It is a gem, and the entire city is proud. But we need to show them how proud we are. You guys, this isn't going to happen next year. Let's be real. But I am here to commit that I want to see it happen, but we all have to fight for it. And I need you to understand that. Be real. Let's be real about it. Yes. We all have to fight for it, okay? So get those kids involved. They will have some fabulous ideas, I'm sure.
Of course. Mr. Brown?
Just one, I think it's a clarification. I'm not sure, but timeline for a new building is off a ways. Obviously, it would require building the community support necessary to pass a bond issue, and thereafter, 4 or 5 years. How quickly, depending on what the interim solution is, how quickly could that be implemented? Is it, if we have, if we come up with the right interim solution, can that be implemented for next academic year? Or is that a year beyond that? And again, I don't need the answer necessarily tonight, but it'd be helpful to know that.
Is it possible? So after we identify interim space, in order for us to start the design process and to get the ball rolling, we simply would have to vote to say to get started. Is that correct? If we wanted to start the design in the consultant phase, and then when we have dollars available, we can vote those dollars out to actually break ground. Is that correct?
Well, we have to retain a firm, and
I mean, we get that.
so there would be expenditures related to that, obviously.
But there's nothing that prohibits us from starting a design phase or starting to think about what a new building looks like.
We're talking about a new building.
Yeah, we're talking about a new building. To your point of why wait, there's nothing to say that we couldn't start the process, and then because the design phase takes a year and a half to what Mr. Trevino said, just a food for thought. Nothing says you have to start it all at the same time, and if we're going to start thinking and you want to incorporate people in a year and a half or so, that coincides. That's just part of the process. We could start early.
Food for thought, so you'll add that to your
Food
list,
for
Mr.
thought.
Superintendent?
Mr. President, to Ms. Gibbs, again, I would consider this one of those questions that we would, make a part of our initial feedback to the board. And I can say a little bit more of what I'm talking about when we get to the point of talking about next steps in this process. But in terms of, I just wanted to, put on the table as a point for your consideration, and Mr. Boe Work, please chime in, or Mr. Trevino, please chime in if I'm misstating it. I think the only thing that I can see as a problem with that is that if we made the consideration of a new building a part of a bond package and all of that, a part of the facilities master plan, then the dollars from the state would be included in the design phase along with the construction phase. if we do it now, we're going to do it by ourselves, and we would pay for the entire design phase by ourselves. So the board would need to consider that. The board would need to consider that as a part of making that decision.
Okay, are we ready? Are you ready to talk about next steps and summarize,
I
Superintendent?
am, and so initially what we had thought about as an administration is that we would kind of go back through all of this and kind of summarize it, but given the hour and given the amount of information that we have received, I don't think that would be wise to do. So what I would propose is that you give the administration a few days to encapsulate what we have heard in notes in a document, and then we will present that document to the entire board, and then the entire board, maybe at the next board meeting or even sooner, can tell us if that is a consensus of what the board would like us to look at. And what I mean by that, I envision us looking at all of the questions and saying and giving, the board a sense of if we think some of these questions might require a long amount of information gathering and so forth to provide an answer to versus things that we can answer and address in a very short time frame. And so that document would reflect that, and it would also reflect asking the board, because some of these questions that have been posed to us, we didn't really take the time to say, yes, this is a consensus of the board. And so I would want to get a feeling of, is that entire list the consensus of the board, or are there some things on that list that the board, as a consensus, as a board, would not want to be addressed right now, but would want to be looked at later on down the road. So those are, and we can spell that out in our email message, to the board in terms of what we're looking for in that regard. But we want to do this as quickly as possible so that we can then move forward. And I think one of the most important questions that we really didn't deal with, but I think can be dealt with in this process, is the timeline for the study to be completed.
Superintendent, I think it's clear that the board wants to move as expeditiously as possible while applying the appropriate amount of caution.
Correct.
So are there thoughts, Board Member Reyes?
So Dr. Stanford, the only thing I would add is, because there are a lot of things that you can spend a lot of time in. I think it's important as you look at all the information, all the feedback that we provided today, what I would like to see from you is your recommendation in saying, if I responded or summarized your request of
Yes.
X, because there's a lot of things that are repetitive, right? So I'm just, a facility, capacity, and academic fidelity. And you say, based on these three, I can come back and give you a viable response to your concerns, not going so deep into the rabbit hole. Because I would like to see if we can make a decision sooner than later, because there are, just as I advocated for the immersion programs, they have to be making decisions here on February 6th or 7th to decide what they're going to do with their middle school kids. So I don't want to rush the decision, but at the same time, if it's possible, based on your analysis of all the information that we have, you can come back and say, I can give the board a summary of what you were looking for, and this is my recommendation based on that. I think I would like to hear that. If that makes sense. Probably doesn't.
Did you want to clarify something?
Yeah. Mr. To Board President, to Ms. Reyes, I want to make, on that last part, I was with you on every step into that last part, and then you tripped me up a little bit. When you say our assessment of whether we can make a recommendation at that point in time?
No, just your assessment of the information, saying, this is viable, this is not viable, this is, to answer your question, yes, this is an academically academically researched thing, and it would be viable, or based on our analysis of the budget, we could get a new building, if it's possible. I'm not saying it can be, but if there's a way to encapsulate the information where you could respond to our concerns in a more summarized way, where you didn't have to go too far into the data?
So, again, if I'm following you, the process I was thinking of is that the next step is for us to take this long list of questions, one, being able to determine what can be answered immediately and what's going to take more time, and then two, for the board to somehow give us a consensus that, yes, this long list is everything that we want to be answered, or if there is not a consensus on certain questions that have been posed. Because we didn't take the time on every last question. So let me give you an example of what I'm saying. Somebody may have said, well, I want to know X, Y, and Z, right? But I didn't see a whole lot of heads nodding in agreement that that should be done. Okay? And so I think the quickest way for us to do this is to send you all the list and for us to get feedback on if there are any questions that you don't think should be done right now as an individual board member. And then we can report back out at a board meeting, you know, what that list now looks like based on that feedback.
Board Member Brown, then Gibbs, then Ragland.
I agree entirely with your thoughts, Dr. Stanford, and your approach. I think that makes sense. I agree with you that among all of those many questions, that there are some that may be significant only to one board member or two, and without having a consensus of the board, those are things that don't make sense for you as the administration to do. You know, you're responsible to the entire board. And I think that process will get us there.
And let me clarify that we can accept the feedback offline. When I say offline, not in a board meeting. And the reason why I would say we would then create, you know, a second document to show what that feedback looks like, we would have to bring it to a board meeting to say, okay, yes, this is what the board collectively would like to do. Because that would be a decision that would have to be made in a board meeting.
Gibbs?
Dr. Stanford, I would just offer that I think we have a lot to do, and we've given you a lot. I would offer that I would suggest, and you can do what you like, that we start with the academic and the school buildings, and then we do administrative second, but those that are going to impact students immediately, that we just offer it, just set the administrative pieces to the side, and let's talk about those things that may have impact on lottery choices, those things in the next few weeks. So that might be a point of delineation, in that that you just, what you can answer, if not, get it to us. I don't want to spend time saying, I don't think your question is good, or we don't want to answer your question. If in your executive approach, you can hear what we've said and say, based on these recommendations, and you can put the questions next to the recommendations, or at least organize them that way. So these are the questions on recommendation 3, these are on 4. So when you bring it to us, it's organized in that fashion. I think that'll help us move quicker.
So let me, Mr. Board President Baker to Ms. Gibbs, let me preface by saying, if a question has not been collectively decided on, it doesn't mean we don't answer that question at some point in time. It just doesn't mean it's a part of the urgency of what we need to do right now. Because our board policies say that basically anytime a board member asks for information, we have that obligation to provide them that information. Correct. Unless it is an administrative burden on us to do that. And then if it is an administrative burden, it goes to that respective committee to decide whether or not the administration should follow up on that. And so I'm not suggesting that all the questions won't get answered at some point in time, but if there is a sense of urgency by this board, which I have heard there is, to move this process, then the administration needs to understand what is the collective will of this board on the questions that have been posed tonight. And if there's a better way to do it, I'm all ears to entertain those. But you know, what I've proposed is what I think might be the most efficient way to accomplish what is that board directive and consensus on the questions that should be moved forward as a sense of urgency. And I was looking for feedback from the board in terms of your suggestion of working on academic questions first and then working on administrative
Site stuff.
sites next. After we've dealt with those academic questions, for me as the representative of the administration, I think that makes sense,
Okay.
given the sense of urgency. And I'm seeing board members' heads not in agreement, so. No objection,
Yep.
yeah.
Mr. Ragland?
So I'm not objecting, I'm asking with specificity to make final recommendation 3 a priority and the cause discussion a priority, those 2 things. In those questions within those 2 recommendations that were already made to us, if we can discuss the academic side of those things. Essentially sew those 2 conversations up and then at your leisure, determine, what's the priority behind those. I'm not sure if everyone agrees with that, but those are, seems to me like those are the 2 pressing issues. And if we want to say that with specificity, that might give even more guidance and structure to what.
Yes, I don't think there's any objection to focusing on
And
those.
just for clarification, that it is high priority on the number 3 and the cause.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yes, that, absolutely.
Anything else, Ms. Superintendent?
Mr. President, 2 members of the board, that concludes the part of this meeting that the administration wanted to review with the board. And so at this point, I will turn everything back over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Stanford. Thanks to the entire administrative team. Thank you, colleagues, for a robust discussion. I appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing from the administration very soon, and we've all agreed we do want to move as expeditiously as possible. I think we may have some students in the audience. Do we have any students in the audience from any of our schools? Just stand up so we can recognize you. We love seeing students at board meetings. Thank you for being here tonight. All right, colleagues, is there anything else for the good of the order? There's a motion and there's a second to adjourn. Hearing no objection, Mr. Treasurer, would you call the roll?
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown. Yes. Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
Yes.
Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
Ms. Adair. Yes. That motion carried.
Thank you. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in the work session.